Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Shin was in DxD world. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. A teenage boy, the appearance of which would look to be 16 years of age, groggily wiped his eyes as the sun shone in through his room. Man, that was a weird dream. I must be reading too much Issei manga if I'm dreaming about getting hit by truck Sama. Shin mumbled to himself as he swung his feet over his bed, his feet touching the cold hardwood floor. Shin's eyes shot open when he felt the cold floor. Since when does carpet get cold? Shin yelled, confused but also silently praying he didn't just step in something wet. Sharply looking down, he was in for a shock when he saw the hardwood flooring. What? Shin asked, confused as he looked all around his room, his eyes stopping when his eyes locked onto a mirror that showed his appearance. The mirror showing a boy, around 16, with black chin-length hair that parted to frame the sides of his face. He had a pale complexion and black eyes to go along with his black hair. Holy shit, I look just like teenage Madara fucking Uchiha. Shin yelled as he secretly admired his toned body. It didn't look like he was on the juice, but you could tell he had conditioned his body quite a lot. Not only that, his genetics appeared to be very good. He had some nice, rounded deltoids, evenly proportioned pectorals, perfectly aligned six-pack, and a middle ground between high and low bicep insertions. Even if he didn't look like a bodybuilder, he definitely had the genetics to become one. Staring at the mirror in a daze, Shin eventually snapped out of his trance, thinking back to his apparent dream, where he was hit by truck Sama after being some pornographic manhwa. Manhwa meaning Korean manga, which basically entails nothing but rape and NTR. For some reason Korean manhwa writers have an obsession with it. Suffice to say, if you are going to read a romance manhwa, be prepared for the oncoming shitstorm. After getting hit by truck Sama, he woke up, assuming it to be a dream due to the memory being a bit foggy. But no, holy shit, I really did get Issei'd. Shin yelled in excitement. His dream, or rather, every otaku's fan's dream had been fulfilled. He had been Issei'd. His excitement was grounded to a halt when a certain question came across his mind. Wait, which world did I get Issei'd to? It was at this time he remembered he looked very similar to a teenage Madara, so he quickly stood up and looked out the nearest window. However, seeing a modern Japan instantly shot down his hopes of being reincarnated into the teenage body of the most badass ninja of all time. Man, I guess I wasn't lucky enough. It would have been nice to become a godlike being and give canon the middle finger by Steel Mido Uzumaki from Hashirama. Shin said to himself. Still though, if I'm not in Naruto, how come I look like Madara Uchiha? Not that I'm complaining. I mean, come on, Madara is just a badass. If someone were to be listening to him, they would most definitely think he was insane. Suddenly, his face morphed into horror as he started to think more and more about his situation. Oh god, what world am I in? What if I'm in a really bad world like High School of the Dead or Berserk, or oh god. Suddenly his whole body went ghastly white as a thought crossed his mind. Please, if there's a god out there or any sort of divine being, I am begging you, please, please, don't let me be in Boku no Pico. Please, Shin begged on his knees to all the divine beings he could possibly think of. It was only common sense that now he was reincarnated into a new world, that he was destined to become the MC. But if the world was Boku no Pico, the thought alone made him consider jumping out his window. Shin, wake up already. Mom said that breakfast is ready. A male voice spoke, alerting Shin to the approaching male. Yet despite this, all he could think was one thing as a mantra constantly played on repeat on his head. Please don't be a trap. Please don't be a trap. Please don't be a trap. Could you really blame him? He was a straight male going through the possibility of being in the Boku no Pico world. As the doorknob to his room turned, his head slowly turned up, his whole body pale despite already being a pale person, desperation clearly evident on his face. The instant the door was opened showing the male, however, his complexion returned as he stood up abruptly. Oh, fuck yeah, Shin yelled, punching his fist in the air. He clearly recognized the person standing outside his door from an anime, light novel that he enjoyed greatly. I can't believe I got so lucky as to be reincarnated here. I can't think of a more perfect world, Shin thought, shedding tears of joy. What are you doing? The male outside his door spoke, clearly confused. Shin wiped away his tears of joy and looked at the Issei, the MC of High School DxD. Or should he say, the previous mic of High School DxD, as with Shin here, he was going to take over Issei's place, bend canon over, and fuck it 12 different ways. Don't worry Issei, I was just relishing in the fact of being in the most bootylicious world ever, Shin said as he cried more tears of joy. Issei, completely ignoring Shin's out-of-the-ordinary behavior, joined him in his replenishment. Fuck yeah we are, Issei yelled as he too pumped his fist in the air. That's why I'm going to become the Harem King, Issei exclaimed, puffing his chest out in pride. Shin, getting over his excitement, walked out of the room, touching Issei's shoulder along the way out. Yes sure, "Don't worry, I'll leave you some scraps," Shin said as he followed the hallway to the stairs, walking down to the kitchen below to get his breakfast, which apparently his new mother made. Issei, completely misunderstanding his words, rushed downstairs thinking he was talking about food. Shin could confirm he was definitely not talking about food when he said he'd leave Issei some scraps. Shin and Issei were on their way to school, walking along the path as they passed several other people on their way to various schools. While this was happening, Shin took the time to recall everything he could remember from high school DxD, which suffice to say, was a lot. High School DxD was a light novel series which he had read all of, multiple times, meaning he knew every little detail of the DxD world. One thing that came to mind was that he knew for sure he had to have a sacred gear. In the light novel of High School DxD, it is explained that Issei's parents spent several years trying to have kids, his mother getting pregnant twice, but had miscarriages. When his father found out she was pregnant for the third time, he paced in front of Shinto shrine, praying that this time nothing would go wrong. Thus, he was born with the boosted gear. However, in this timeline, his mother only had one miscarriage, her second time getting pregnant resulting in his birth. After he was born, they tried again and successfully had Issei. Issei and himself were 19 months apart in age, putting his birthday in November 19th to be exact. As Shin was born first, it was a mystery as to which of the two had the boosted gear. It could be Shin, it could be Issei. However, he did know it was likely they both had a sacred gear. So with Issei being 15 years old, that means they are 1 year away from canon, giving Shin a full year to plan and train. The first step would be to plan out several key points in the series and alter the events leading up to them to turn in his favor. Secondly, he would need to train. So far, it was apparent that he already had a head start in that department from what he saw of himself earlier. However, awakening the sacred gear is more strength of mind than body, meaning meditation will be involved. The quicker he awakens his sacred gear, the faster he can plan out his approach to getting stronger. All of this planning and deduction was a natural phenomenon for him. In his previous world, he was an otaku who played a lot of MMOS. Playing MMOS is where he got most of his planning and deduction skills. Deduction skills coming from underlying messages and actions that would often appear in questing. His planning skills is something all gamers have. To couple with this, as an otaku, he knew a lot about going about gaining strength, even if not all methods were completely accurate. After watching Gohan vs. Cell, however, he was inspired to become stronger in his previous world. Thus, he went about working out, starting with just a pair of dumbbells, mainly doing a lot of curls. From there, his workout kept increasing until he was what one could consider a fitness enthusiast. It's likely this fact that he had been reincarnated with a physique very similar to his previous one, only with much better genetics. "Shin, what do you think we are going to be doing for the first day of the school year?" Issei asked him, drawing his attention to him. First day of the school year. That's good to know, Shin thought. Most likely just a lot of orientations, explanations of class rules, and exercises to get you used to your classmates. You know, the usual stuff you do on your first day, Shin said. "Yeah, guess you're right," Issei said. "So, Shin, what was that about this morning? Are you finally turning to the way of the Eros?" Issei asked excitedly. Pulling a page right out of Kakashi's book, he kept his face forward, ignoring Issei. Did you say something, Issei?" Shin said, looking at Issei bored. Issei's face faltered. "Stupid pretty boy." Issei threw what he considered to be an insult at Shin, to which Shin just ignored. The longer he was in this world, the more he remembers about his life here thus far. From what he knew so far, Issei called him pretty boy quite often, mostly due to the fact that just like Kiba, he had the attention of most of the girls in the school. This made him mentally facepalm when he remembered what nickname they had given him. Kiba was the Prince of Kyo due to his knight in shining armor personality. However, Shin had decided to stick to himself, deciding not to get himself involved in much. Somehow, in all the girls' minds, this translated to him being mysterious and sexy, earning him the nickname King of Kyo. He wanted to avoid attention, but it seemed to be that exact mindset only drew more attention to him. Then again, however, when you do to a school with little male populace, and you are considered a pretty boy, it's essentially impossible to avoid attention. Maybe he would have been better off acting like Issei and openly show his perverseness. Which as an otaku, he had a lot of that. After 2 grueling hours of orientation, he was assigned his classroom, which admittedly took him a while to find due to this being his first time navigating the school despite actually attending here for a year. The classroom was already full, him being the last person to arrive, meaning all eyes were on him, especially the female populace. Going to the blackboard, he took a look at the chart hung on it, showing the seating arrangements. He was seated near the middle of the class, however, his eyes widened when he saw who was seated next to him. Looking back, he looked for the single most eye-catching thing in the room, Rias Gremory's crimson red hair. When he found her, which was relatively easy to consider her hair color, he was surprised he didn't pop a hard one then and there. The anime truly did her no justice. This just went to show, no matter how much we try and convince ourselves, 3D is better than 2D. Walking over to her, he took the seat next to her, the only seat not occupied in the entire classroom. Setting his bag down, he heard the most shiver-inducing voice he had ever heard. Just like the anime did not do her looks justice, neither did it do her voice justice. Her voice was so naturally sultry, so sinful that it sent shivers down his spine. Honestly, I always kind of dislike Rias for her nerviness. But looking at her now, I don't think I can care about that anymore. Just like any other human male, he had fallen victim to the commands of his second head. However, he kept himself from blushing of showing any signs of his thoughts. After all, he had to make a good impression. "Hello, my name is Rias Gremory. It is nice to meet you," Rias said, Shin, taking his seat and looking into her blue-green eyes. "That's weird. I thought this school was for humans," Shin said, deciding to fuck with her a bit, relishing in the shocked look that overcame her face. "After all, I thought goddesses were bound to heaven. At least, that's what the Bible says." Shin continued before she could make any statement. This instantly shot away her shocked look, being replaced by one of relief. Although Shin did take pride in the fact that there was a dusting of red along her cheeks. "My name is Shin, by the way. Shin Hyodu." Shin smiled, causing Ria's blush to deepen. "Gremory, isn't that a strong Duke of Jinistan in demonology? That's a cool last name to have," Shin said, once again surprising Rias. "Yes, you are correct. Not many people know that," Rias said, gaining an interest in the boy next to her. "Well, I guess you could say I'm fascinated by the supernatural. Demonology, Christianity, Norse, Greek, Shinto. They are all quite interesting to me," Shin said, lying straight out of his ass. However, he knew this would grab Ria's attention, something that would come in handy. "Is that so?" Rias said, smiling that devilish smile of hers. It really took all Shin had not to give in and become flustered when he saw that smile. "Why is that?" Rias asked. Shin scratched his cheek, trying to play his part to the best ability that he could. "I don't know, really. I guess, for some reason, I've always felt drawn to it. As if in some way I'm connected to it," Shin said. Shin smiled when he saw he had successfully piqued Ria's interest with his words. He worded it specifically to sound like he was a person unbeknownst to his supernatural stature. Without a doubt, she would now be keeping an eye on him, resulting in it easier for her to recognize his potential over the next year. Whatever Rias was going to say next, however, was cut off when the teacher entered the class, drawing the attention of all the students. It was now the end of class, and Shin was packing up all his stuff. Seeing Rias was getting up to leave, he purposefully knocked the pencil on the side of the desk on the floor. Rias, who had just stood up, took notice of the pencil and bent down to pick it up. By the time she looked up, however, Shin was already walking out the door of the classroom. Deciding she would just give it to him tomorrow, she picked up her stuff from her desk and left the classroom, her destination the Orc. However, along the way of the Orc, she saw Shin again, sitting against a tree in a comfortable position with his eyes closed. He seemed to be meditating. This provided her the perfect opportunity. If Shin was meditating, then it will be easier for her to sense a sacred gear in him if he has one. Closing her eyes, she focused on Shin's life essence, feeling it out. For a second, she could feel something inside him, but it was gone just as quick as she felt it, not giving her the chance to get a read on what it was. Opening her eyes, she was shocked to see Shin right in front of her, staring at her. This caused her step back warily, her face flushed red. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. It's just that I felt someone near me while I was meditating. I was surprised to see you there, just looking at me with your eyes closed," Shin said, scratching the back of his head. Rias relaxed, so that was why whatever she felt inside of him disappeared so quickly, because he had stopped meditating to see who was near him. However, the fact that she couldn't feel it at all once he stopped meditating suggested the sacred gear was hiding very well inside of him. In the case of sacred gears, this usually meant they were strong. "No need to apologize, you didn't mean to scare me," Rias said, regaining her composure. "By the way, what were you doing?" Shin asked, acting confused. "Not that I don't mind you staring at me, but why do it with your eyes closed? Doesn't that defeat the purpose?" Shin said. Rias once again became flustered, something that didn't happen very often. Rias stammered, struggling to come up with an explanation for what she was doing. Seeing none, she decided to pick option 2. "I wanted to return this to you," Rias said as she pulled out his pencil, or at least what she thought was his pencil. Shin stared at her confused. Thanks, but those aren't mine," Shin said as he pointed to her hand. Rias looked at her hand and her whole face turned an atomic red in embarrassment. There she was, holding her reading glasses, offering them to Shin. Quickly pulling them back, she put them back in her pocket and pulled out Shin's pencil. "I mean this. You dropped it when you left class," Rias said, her face looking at the ground to hide her embarrassment. "Oh, thanks," Shin said as he approached her and took his pencil, his hand gliding past hers as he took his pencil back, causing her to once again sense whatever was inside of him. This time, she could feel it long enough to deduct that whatever the sacred gear was, it was very strong. At the least, long in his class. Her embarrassment gone, she looked at Shin in shock. "Thanks a lot for giving this back. See you tomorrow," Shin said as he walked off, throwing her a wave over his shoulder, his mission successfully completed. Because of the close contact, she should have been able to sense my sacred gear. Although I don't know what it is, or how powerful it is, if she knows I have one, she will keep an eye on me. Once she becomes desperate enough, she'll make her move, Shin thought as he walked away. From this point on, he would work on becoming stronger, preparing for the future. It's been a month since he was reincarnated into the DxD world as Issei's older brother. Thus far, he would say his time here beneficial. As his alarm clock rung, showing the time being 4:30 a.m., he shut the alarm clock the instant it started ringing. His internal clock was already used to waking up at this time, so most of the time, he was awake a few minutes before his alarm went off. Getting up this early, he was the only one awake at these times, everyone else still asleep. Thus, he started his morning routine. Getting up, he went downstairs dressed only in his sleepwear, which was his boxers. His appearance had changed considerably within the last month. Currently, he was on a 6-month-long bulk, so the previous lean figure he had before was gone, as he had already put on 5 kilos since he started a new diet. When he was reincarnated, he weighed 59 kilos. He was planning to have a 6-month bulk. The bulk would end on the 1st of April, meaning the month was currently October. His goal by the end of this bulk was to be 90 kilos. As he entered the kitchen, he prepared to start the first thing he did every morning, and that was cook his breakfast. For the last month, his breakfast had been the exact same: 5 scrambled eggs, 4 pieces of bacon, and 1 cup of oatmeal. In the oatmeal, he would put banana slices for potassium and some ground cinnamon for some flavor. After that, he went on to do his meal preps for the day. Currently, he was eating 6 full-course meals a day, eating a 6,000-calorie diet. His meal prep mainly consisted of grilling some bison burgers, ribeye, and cooking rice. From there, he would put all 5 of his other meals into Tupperware containers. That way all he would have to do is heat them up and eat them, saving him a lot of time. Now that he had eaten breakfast and all his meals were prepared, the time was around 6 a.m., meaning it was time for his morning run. Around this time of day is when the sun would rise, so it was the perfect time to run. He would go on a run until 7:30 a.m., working up quite a sweat, as well as expanding a lot of energy, making it easier for him to eat meal too. When he got home, he took a shower, got dressed for school, and finished all the homework he hadn't done the night before. At around 7:45 a.m., he would leave for school, usually arriving at 7:55 a.m. Once he got to school, he would go straight to the student council office so he could eat meal too. The student council office was the only place in the school besides the teacher's lounge that had a microwave. Thus, Dohnaseek, the student council president, had granted him permission to use the microwave whenever he wanted, so long as he kept his record clean and kept a B average. Entering the student council office, he was greeted by all the student council members. Over the last month, he had been coming here 3 times a day to eat his meals, so it was safe to say he had developed a good relationship with everyone on the student council, some more than others. Going to the microwave, he took out his meal pack, which was really just a backpack dedicated to hauling around his meals, and put it in the corner of the room, taking out meal too. While he was at school, he always left his meal pack in the student council room since he had to come here to heat up his meals anyway. After heating up his meal, he sat down in front of Sona's desk, a chessboard set up on it. In the mornings, Sona and he would always play a match of chess while he ate. Now, he wasn't Sona's level of skill when it came to chess, but he wasn't bad either. It's just that Sona was that good. Meal 2 consisted of 500 grams of chopped up ribeye, 3 cups of rice, 200 grams of spinach, and a cup of orange juice. The ribeye was always cooked medium rare, so the juices always leaked into the rice and gave it a really nice flavor. Sona and he always played chess until the bell signaling the first class rung, which was at 8:25. The class would start at 8:30. Nothing else would happen until 11 a.m. when lunch came around. At QO, they got an hour's lunch break, which was very nice. Going to the student council room, it was time to eat meal 3. Meal 3 consisted of 2 bison burgers, 2 cups of rice, a banana, and 2 tomatoes. After eating meal 3, he would help the student council out with things that needed to be done, which was usually carrying boxes and papers to places. After lunch, he would go back to class and wouldn't do anything else of importance until the final bell rang at 3:45 p.m., signaling the end of school for the day. Just like for meals 2 and 3, meal 4 would also be eaten at the student council office. Meal 4 was 500 grams of chopped ribeye, 3 cups of rice, 200 grams of spinach, and a cup of orange juice. The exact same as meal 2. Afterward, he would do all his homework in the student council office before going to the gym. Usually, he would go to the gym around 6 p.m. After his gym sessions, usually ending around 7:30 p.m., he would head home, where he would eat meal 5. Meal 5 was the exact same as meal 3, 2 bison burgers, 2 cups of rice, a banana, and 2 tomatoes. Afterward, he would go on his night run, usually getting home at 9 p.m. where he would eat his 6th and final meal. Meal 6 was unlike the others, as it could be considered a meal, but it wasn't actually food. For meal 6, he would drink a liter of milk with peanut butter chocolate protein powder and a banana. After his 6th meal, he would go meditate in his room for 30 minutes usually, trying to unlock his sacred gear, but this far had been unsuccessful. After meditation, he would go to bed, ready to start the next day. And thus was the daily life of one Shin as he prepared for what he knew was to come in the near future. All of this was so he could get stronger, so he could strengthen his body. He was excited to see what the future had in store for him. For as long as he lived, there was one thing that he had always seen people do. You could say it was human nature, I guess. That being when the average person saw some huge bodybuilder walking down the street, they always say, just imagine how much they have to work out to look like that. What would Shin say to those people? Well, to sum it up, he would say they're ignorant. The truth is, you don't even really need to work out every day to look like a bodybuilder. Ask any bodybuilder out there in the world, they will always tell you the same thing. Lifting weights is easy, and over time, you start to find exercises you really enjoy, giving you the motivation to work out. The hardest part of gaining muscle is eating. For the first month of his new 6,000-calorie diet, he had done relatively fine with his diet, sticking to it without any problems. However, the longer he was on it, going on 4 months now, the harder and harder it became to keep that same motivation. For anybody who has tried to bulk, they could surely sympathize with how hard it is to eat when you're not hungry. To force-feed yourself, knowing that without it, you would not reach the goals you wanted. Shin couldn't help but think to himself, could this be considered an eating disorder? Usually, an eating disorder has negative effects on your body, like anorexia. Although it wasn't as bad as most eating disorders, he was sure his blood pressure would disagree. However, the upside is that he was making good progress so far. Just the other day, he had deadlifted 130 kilograms, which was no easy feat being at 68 kilograms. Although, it admittedly wasn't as much as he was capable of lifting in his previous life. Unfortunately, he was quite sure he did not have the boosted gear. When he made the goal of getting up to 90 kilograms, he accounted for the possibility of him having the boosted gear, allowing him to essentially juice himself up on mega steroids without negatively affecting his body. However, he was thus far able to put on 10 kilograms of lean body mass, which was an impressive feat, far better than anything he had ever achieved before. The most he had ever put on before during a cycle was 13 kilograms over the course of a full year. He had suspicions that the reason for this was genetics. As he had stated before, his genetics were much better than his previous life, and that fact just kept appearing again and again. Tapping the button on his alarm clock just as it started ringing, he sat and swung his feet over his bed, landing on the cold hardwood floors. Walking into the bathroom, he emptied himself of his bodily fluids and did something that has become a habit to him, and that was weighing himself as soon as he woke up. Getting on his scale, his eyes widened when he read the readings. Not believing the readings, he double-checked to see if he was holding something or if anything was sitting on the scale that would tamper with the readings. Seeing none, however, he stepped off the scale and reweighed himself. The scale shooting out the same numbers. That doesn't make any sense. How did I gain 2.2 kilograms in a single night? That's months' worth of progress in a single night, Shin said, surprised. Well, I guess I am still going through puberty, so there is always the chance I got a sudden inrush of hormones, Shin mumbled, trying to make sense of the situation. After going through his usual routine of breakfast, meal prep, and his run, he was now approaching the student council office, ready to eat meal 2. Currently, there were very few people roaming the halls of Kyo Academy due to it still being over half an hour before school starts. As he entered the student council room, he was greeted to the sight of Sona and Tsubaki, the president and vice president of the student council respectively, working on several stacks of papers. What's with all the papers? That's even more than normal, Shin asked, drawing Sona's attention, showing the bags under her eyes, suggesting she had been at this for a while. The Kyo Academy DNS crashed, so everything that is usually handled electronically by programs, we now have to do by hand until the DNS is fixed, Sona said. That sucks, but why can't you just switch to a different DNS? It's not that hard, and there are several thousand you could choose from. Shin offered a solution. We wish it was that simple, but all of the programs run off of that DNS. If we change the DNS, we would have to get someone to go into the code of every single one of those programs and change the DNS. That would take even longer than to fix the DNS we currently use. Thankfully, it should be fixed by noon, Sona said. Shin nodded, looking around the room, looking for someone in particular. In the corner of the student council room was one silver-haired beauty, laying face down into her desk. So, it seems Snow White is asleep then. Well, we all know what the only way to wake her up would be then, Shin said as he approached the silver-haired beauty. Don't bother, Hayato. Momo's just pretending to be asleep. One blue-haired girl, by the name of Tsubasa Yura, said. Moo, why would you do that, Yura? Momo said as she lifted her head and pouted. Shin chuckled as he arrived in front of Momo. This was an often occurrence for them. They weren't dating, but they did act very flirtatious with one another all the time. I think she's just jealous you don't give her as much attention as you do Momo, another girl, Rei Kusaka, said. Well, that's only natural. Flirting with one person you find attractive is one thing, but if I went around flirting with every person I found attractive, I would just be a womanizer, Shin said, causing Momo's face to go atomic red. Don't worry, Shin, I wouldn't mind sharing you with Momo, Rias said as she came up behind him and jumped on his back, wrapping her hands around his neck and hanging off of him. Threesomes, Shin said aloud as if contemplating it. It'd definitely be good cardio, Shin said, causing everyone's face to fault. Only you would view sex as cardio, Tsubasa said blandly. Hey, what can I say? Fastly beating heart, sweat flying everywhere, heavy breathing. It definitely sounds like cardio to me, Shin said, being the comedic person he is. I say let's go for it. To the janitor's closet, Shin said, pumping his fist up in the air. Shin, a voice called, instantly killing his excitement. I've told you many times before, and I'll tell you again. What you and the others do in your free time is not my business, but there will be no sex happening on school grounds. Sona said. All right, Shin said disappointedly as Rhea dropped down from his back. Almost instantly, however, it returned, punching his fist into his hand. I'm sure I can replace my night run with a threesome. What do you say, Momo? Rhea, Shin said. Sure, no, was Rhea and Momo's response respectively. Rhea looked excited at the aspect, even though Shin knew she wasn't being serious. Momo, however, was so red it put even Rhea's hair to shame. Idiot, Momo said as she threw a binder at him, hitting him in the face, but he didn't react at all. Classic tsundere reaction, Shin said, giving Momo a thumbs up. Don't worry, I'll break through that wall eventually and make you scream my name in pleasure, Shin said, steam now coming out of Momo's ears. Pervert, Momo said as she turned away from him and started furiously working on her student council duties, which at the moment was helping Sona sign papers. Grabbing the binder off of the floor, Shin set it back on her desk. Only for you, Snow White, Shin said as Momo started to do paperwork even faster while Shin ignored the pouting Tsubasa and Rhea. Don't mistake his actions. He fully planned on making every person in this room submit to him and become a part of his harem. At the moment, however, he simply didn't have the time to concern himself with such matters. He'd leave that until he had some more free time once canon rolled around. Turning around, he walked over to the microwave and started heating up his second meal of the day. By the way, Shin, did you go through a growth spurt? You look taller than you did yesterday, Rhea asked as she stood beside him, legs crossed and bent over, trying to get him to show her some of the same attention he showed Momo. Maybe. I noticed this morning I had put on 2.2 kilograms, which usually takes months to put on. A sudden growth spurt could definitely attribute to that, Shin said as Rhea went to her cubicle and looked around her desk before pulling out a tape measure that you would usually see a tailor use. Stand against the wall, I'll check for you, Rhea said, her energetic bubbliness showing. Standing up against the wall like she said, he allowed Rhea to measure his height, admiring how cute she looked when she smiled. 185¼ centimeters. So, in American terms, 6 feet 1 inch, Rhea said. It would appear then that I did experience a growth spurt. That's 5 centimeters taller than I was yesterday, Shin said, but he had a feeling that he couldn't shake telling him it wasn't as simple as that. By the way, why do you have a tape measure at the ready? That's something I'd expect from a guy, not a girl, Shin said. Why, are girls not suited to measuring things? Rhea said dangerously, taking his statement as being sexist. No, you just know boys and how much they love to measure certain things, Shin said, taking his meal out of the microwave while all the girls looked at him in confusion. Seeing their looks, he decided to elaborate. Seriously, just think about it. What thing, in particular, would boys love to measure? Shin said, suddenly causing all the girls in the room to blush in embarrassment. Pervert, Momo yelled. You can call me that all you want, but it's a fact, Shin said as he sat down and started eating his meal. So, then you're saying you've done that, Rhea said, wiggling her eyebrows as her face got closer to his. Looking up at her, he stated blatantly, of course, I am a guy after all. It's only natural to be curious. In fact, it was one of the first things I did when I was reincarnated. Shin thought to himself, don't just openly state things like that. Momo yelled from across the room, her face just as red as before. Hey, it's not like we boys are the only ones that do it. You girls are constantly getting your sizes measured, Shin said. That's different. It's for clothes, Momo yelled. Ah yes, of course. Well, then I too measured my penis, just so I knew what size underwear and pants to get. Not at all because I was curious, Shin said, eating his meal and causing Momo to steam from her ears again. In fact, with my sudden growth spurt, it wouldn't be a bad idea to remeasure. You know, for new underwear and pants, Shin said smirking, knowing it would tip Momo over the edge as she burst into flames and promptly fainted. Did you really have to go so far as to make her faint? Hayatu, Sona said in clear annoyance. Yes, was Shin's simple answer. Sona released a frustrated sigh and massaged her temples. Ever since a couple of months ago, Shin would constantly flirt with Momo and make her do things like this. So, with all the paperwork you have to do, is it safe for me to assume we won't be playing chess this morning? I was hoping to beat you again. What is our record now? 78-12 in your favor, Shin said, enjoying the flustered look that came over Sona's face when he mentioned their record. Of course, this always happened, and Shin, of course, knew the reason why. Although Sona hasn't mentioned it to him, it was Citri tradition that she would marry whoever beat her in a game of chess, and he had beaten her 12 times. This fact caused her to get flustered every time he mentioned it. Because of that, Shin made sure to mention it as much as possible. Why yes, it would be safe to assume as much, Sona said with a blush on her cheeks, causing the occupants of the room to chuckle. Meanwhile, Shin pretended to be oblivious to such things. Okay, I guess I could use a break from getting my ass kicked for today, Shin said as he pulled out a very hefty book, one that gathered all their attention. That's a big book you got there, Shin, Tsubasa said as she eyed it before her eyes widened seeing the cover. On the cover, it showed a depiction of a war. The cover seemed to have 3 realms, the realm at the top containing golden clouds and people with white wings. In the middle was a battleground, people with black feathery wings fighting the people with white wings. And at the bottom was what she could only describe as a fiery wasteland, people with black bat-like wings fighting the ones with black feathery wings. That's an understatement. This thing is huge, Shin said, opening up the book and flipping to a string that was attached to the book and used as a bookmark. What's it about? Tsubasa asked nervously, being the only person to have seen the cover. It's about the supernatural, the Christianity religion. Although, this book depicts things that I haven't quite seen or heard of before. I'm not sure whether the person who wrote this was trying to write fiction, or if he was just crazy, Shin said as he is flipping the page, an eye-catching picture drawing her attention. The picture was of a man, but his face was just a blinding white light. He was wearing white and gold robes, something you would expect from a noble, and had 12 golden white wings coming from his back. But it is interesting. This book depicts a war, one they call the three-way war between angels, fallen angels, and devils. And just like that, there was complete and utter silence in the room. Every person in the room staring at Shin in shock. Although, if you ask me, the people in this book are dumbasses. They fight because they are supposedly natural enemies, fighting a large-scale war with no real goal. I could understand if they were animals, acting solely on instinct, but they have intelligence. It seems to me to be just the biggest dick measuring contest I've ever seen. Especially the 2 dragons part, Shin said. What dragons? Sona stuttered, obviously nervous about something. It's these 2 dragons in the book, D-Dragon Albion. Just like the angels, fallen angels, and devils, they are evidently natural enemies. They're dubbed the 2 heavenly dragons and have unfathomable strength. Evidently the 3 races got in the middle of their fight and had to form together to defeat the 2 dragons, sealing them in these things called sacred gears, artifacts given to humans to give them a chance in this supernatural world. Shin said as he flipped backward a few pages, showing 2 giant dragons fighting, one red and the other white. All around them were the 3 races, working together to defeat the dragons. Oh, how much Shin loved the shocked and panicked looks on their faces at the moment. This had to be one of his favorite things to do, to talk about or hint at supernatural things to fuck with everyone. Where did you get something as ludicrous as that? Sona said, trying to play it off. Shin's response was to smirk. About that, I actually sort of stole it from your bookcase, Shin said as he pointed to the bookcase in the corner of the room. As well as this, Shin said as he pulled another book out. This one has the word Sitri clan labeled on the front. This one is about the before-mentioned devils, the Sitri clan of the 72 pillars to be exact. Did you know, Sona, that if you were from the Sitri clan, you would be betrothed to me? Shin said as he looked at her, relishing in the panicked expression on her face. Is that so? Sona said distantly. Yea, evidently it's a long-time practice amongst the Sitri that whenever a female Sitri is beaten in a game of chess by a male, the 2 are to become betrothed. As I have beaten you 12 times, we would be engaged. Luckily for you, however, you're not a Sitri, Shin said with a smile as the whole room was dead silent. Why yea, all right, Sona stuttered, her face completely red. Luckily for her, the starting bell chose this exact time to ring, signaling everyone to get to the first class of the day. Well, looks like it's time for class. I'll see you all for lunch, Issei said as he put the 2 books back into his bag and walking out, smirking from ear to ear once his back was turned to all the student council members in amusement. As the door shut behind him, everyone looked at Sona. I swear, sometimes, it feels like he knows about the supernatural, Sona said as she rubbed her temples, feeling relieved that she knew for a fact he was clueless. I know what you mean. Just the other day, in a conversation we had about what superpowers would be cool to have, he said it'd be awesome to have a mirror that could reflect any attacks back at the person who sent it. Tsubaki said, remembering back to how flustered she got when Shin indirectly called her powers awesome. That's an oddly specific answer, Sona said, now starting to think it was entirely a possibility he knew about the supernatural. This hadn't been the only time that Shin would have hinted at it either, only to do something that would dismiss their thoughts. Then why don't we do a test? Momo said from her corner of the room. You know, like subtly hint at supernatural things and see if he has any reaction to them, Momo suggested. That's a good idea. We'll do that during lunch then, Sona said. Morning, Rias, Shin said as he sat down in his seat. Over the last 4 months, he had developed a semi-close friendship with Rias. Morning, Shin. How are you doing today? Rias asked, flashing her smile. Rias was one of the only people besides Momo that he would often flirt with, but in the case of Rias, it was more of a silent game between the 2 of them to get the other to blush. It is good so far. Made Momo pass out again, Shin said as he sat down in his seat and sat his school bag by his side. Really? What did you do this time? Rias asked, curious about what he did to make Momo pass out, which was a relatively common occurrence, but always happened in a different way. I started talking about my penis, Shin said, just as the class took that exact moment to become silent, causing everyone to look at him. Rias smirked and covered her mouth in order to try and hide her chuckling. Really? You all had to choose that exact moment to be silent. For fuck's sakes, Shin said as he shook his head. Ara, this seems to be an interesting conversation, someone said as they sat on Shin's desk, causing Shin to look to the side and see one Akino Heimjima. Well, yay, of course. Naturally, a conversation about my penis would be interesting to any girl, Shin said sagely as he rubbed his chin, his eyes closed and his head nodding. You're an idiot. You know that, right? Rias said from his side as the whole class deadpanned at him. Speaking about penis, has anybody seen Bofa today? He was supposed to be here, Shin said, internally smirking and cackling madly. Bofa, who's that? Rias asked curiously but regretted at the instant she saw the grin on Shin's face. Meanwhile, Shin was laughing like a madman on the inside at finally getting the chance to use some memes from his previous life. Who else? Bofa D's nuts. Huh, Shin said as he laughed madly. Meanwhile, everyone else in the room just looked at him like an idiot. Oh, come on, that was funny, Shin said as he started to sulk. I was wrong, you're not an idiot. You're a complete moron, Rias said, Shin seemingly being physically attacked by her words as he grabbed his heart in pain. You are all uncultured, Shin said as his face fell and smacked his desk in depression. Despite all this, everyone started to laugh. Although the joke he made could definitely be considered offensive, they all knew that's just how Shin was, and he didn't mean anything by it. So now you all laugh, Shin said as he only went deeper into depression. After a little bit, everyone went back to what they were doing while waiting for class to start, and Shin was knocked out of his depression as he felt a pair of squishy things land on his head. No need to be so depressed, Shin. If you wanted, there is always certain ways we could cure that depression. Akino's voice tickled his ear. In an instant, his depression gone, he sat up and punched his fist into his hand. To the janitor's closet, Shin said excitedly, causing Akino to giggle. Shin, Rias' voice called out, a dangerous edge to the voice. Turning around, Shin looked at Rias before suddenly coming to an epiphany. Oh, how rude of me, Shin said as he suddenly had an arm hanging around Akino's shoulder. Rias, would you like to have a threesome in the janitor's closet with Akino and me? Shin said, causing Rias' face to go red. Ara, it sounds like a good idea to me. What do you say, Rias? Akino said as she leaned into Shin and relished in Rias' blushing face. Akino was the third, and final, person that he often flirted with, as she too was in on the silent game. Rias and him were having to see who could get the other to blush. Thus far, Shin hadn't lost once. Figuring this might be her opportunity to finally get him to blush, she decided to play along. Standing up and pushing her breasts into Shin's arm. I wouldn't be opposed to the idea, Rias said against Shin's ear, causing him to shiver a bit, but didn't blush. All right, got the condoms in my back pocket, time to cross off one of the most important milestones in any man's life, Shin said as he started walking off with them, everyone's eyes following them. By now, it was more of a game of chicken than anything else. Just as they reached the door, however, their teacher chose this exact moment to make his appearance. And where do you three think you're going? The teacher said with a dangerous tone, thinking they were about to skip class. We are about to go have a threesome in the janitor's closet, Shin said bluntly, causing Rias and Akino to blush while the teacher's face faltered. You can't be serious, the teacher said, giving him an "are you stupid" look. My erection disagrees, Shin once again stated bluntly, causing Akino and Rias' blush to deepen. Just go to your seats, the teacher said as he groaned and the bell signaling the start of the class rung. Damn, so close, Shin said disappointed as he walked back to his seat, sulking the whole way. Shin groaned as he finished the last bits of his third meal of the day, having struggled to eat the last few bites of the meal. I can't wait till it's time to start cutting. I won't have to eat as much as I do now, Shin said as he put his Tupperware container to the side. Tsubaki, would you please send this to Sirzechs Lucifer? Sona's voice reached his ears, surprising him that she would talk about the supernatural right in front of him. Sirzechs Lucifer, Shin asked, pretending to be confused. Why does that name sound familiar? Shin asked, causing the occupant's eyes to snap over to him. Oh, so that's their game. They think I know about the supernatural. Well, two can play at that game. Oh, I remember now, Shin said as he walked over to Sona's bookshelf, looking for a specific book. Trailing his fingers across the backs of the books, his fingers landed on one in particular. Yes, Sirzechs Lucifer. I read about him and a woman named Graphia Lucifuge in one of your books. It was a love story somewhat similar to Romeo and Juliet. Well, without the bad ending at least, Shin said as he pulled out the books and flipped to a page that had a picture of Sirzechs and Graphia. It was a good read. By the way, the heroine, Graphia, even if it was just a portrait of some fictional character, she's still the hottest person I've ever seen in my life, Shin said as Rhea choked on the water she was drinking. Not to mention her cold attitude and great strength. She has all the attributes to be the perfect queen. Don't you think, Sona? Shin said, smirking with his back turned to Sona. If she wanted to play games, he would too. Although Sirzechs' childhood friend in the book, Seraphal Leviathan, she was really hot as well. Not to mention her obsession with her little sister. Just imagine the threesomes, Shin said as he heard Sona quite literally choke on air. Too bad it's all fiction though. How cool would it be to live in a world like that? Shin said disappointedly as he put the book back into place. Turning around and seeing Sona's blushing face, he tilted his head in confusion. Are you all right, Sona? Your face is a little red, Shin asked, internally smirking. Why yay, I'm fine, Sona said, trying to regain her composure. This just made her even more suspicious of Shin. Shin, seeing all the paperwork from this morning was done, figured the DNS had been fixed and approached Sona's desk. Seeing as how we didn't get to play chess this morning, wanna play now? Shin asked, noticing the folded-up chessboard on her desk. It wasn't the board they usually used, but it was still a chessboard. Yes, I would like that, Sona said as she unfolded the chessboard, the pieces coming out of the space left between the board when it was folded up. What's with the red and white chess pieces? What's wrong with the traditional black and white? Shin asked, but he knew that the red pieces were her evil pieces. Decided to change things up a bit. These red pieces were a gift given to me a while ago by my parents. They're called evil pieces, Sona said, gauging Shin's reaction. Shin laughed in amusement at the name of her chess pieces. Evil pieces. What makes these chess pieces evil? Shin asked, laughing mockingly. Sona frowned, disappointed by his answer. It seemed Shin didn't know what evil pieces were, meaning he likely didn't know what the supernatural was. Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. Shin picked up the red king piece and inspected it, noting how it felt weird in his hand, most likely due to the fact that it was directly linked to Sona. The name evil pieces, though, sound like something a devil would use if they played chess. No, Shin said, causing Sona to eye him. Yay, it does sound that way, Sona said, a certain kind of edginess in her voice. Alright, I'll use the evil pieces. As a goddess, you shouldn't let these evil pieces taint your hands, Shin said as he picked all of Sona's evil pieces, noting how each one felt extremely weird. Is this what demonic magic feels like? It's the first time I've ever actually been able to feel it, Shin thought, having an ulterior motive to using the evil pieces. If I use Sona's evil pieces, I'll constantly be in contact with demonic energy, which if I haven't awakened my sacred gear as of yet, this definitely should. Shin thought to himself as he set all the evil pieces down onto his side of the board. White moves first, Shin said smiling, showing off his pearly whites as Sona made her first move, signaling the start of their game. In the end, Sona had beaten him once again, but he didn't care as he was the real winner of the whole situation. Midway through he felt something inside of him resonate with Sona's evil pieces, making something inside him change. When it happened, Sona and everyone else stared at him, shocked. He took that as his sacred gear finally being awakened, but as of yet, when he tried to call it out, nothing happened. No gauntlet appearing on either hand, no spear materializing from thin air, no rings appearing on his hand. Oh well, he was sure that with his sacred gear being awakened now, it would show up eventually. For now, however, he was on his way home from his night run, nothing too eventful happening to him after lunch. Of course, all the student council members kept hinting at supernatural things the whole time he was there, but after an hour of dismissing them, he put on some headphones and listened to some music so he didn't have to deal with it any longer. The next day when he woke up, he followed the same routine as yesterday, getting up and going to the bathroom to empty his fluids, then weighed himself. What the fuck? Shin said, shocked as he noticed he had another unexplained gain in weight. Okay, something is going on. I need to make an appointment ASAP, Shin said as he went back to his room and made a doctor's appointment as soon as he could, which would be 9 a.m. this morning. Afterward, he made a call to Sona, informing her that he would be late to school because of a doctor's appointment. Suffice to say, she wasn't happy that he was going to miss half the school day because of an abrupt doctor's appointment. After going through his normal morning routine, he went to the doctor's in which he explained the situation, in which he was going through several inrushes of hormones, and while he was there, they measured his height, in which he grew another 5 centimeters overnight. After going through several scans, blood work, and urine tests, the doctor came back with all the information an hour later, the clock on the wall reading 10:30 a.m. We got all your results back, Mr. Hayadu, and for the most part, you are a very healthy person. Your heart, liver, and kidney function are well above the healthy standard. Your blood pressure isn't amazing, but it's still in the healthy range. White blood cell count's good, glucose levels fine, but then there's this, the doctor said as he handed Shin a clipboard and pointed to a certain portion of the paper. This right here is your testosterone and estrogen. It's off the charts, the likes of which we only see in someone who has been taking several hundred mg of steroids daily. Yet on the tox screen, it confirmed you have not been taking any. To be completely honest, we've never seen anything like it. Your body, for some reason we can't explain, is producing way more testosterone and estrogen than needed, the doctor said, shocking Shin. What? That doesn't make any sense. Unless, his eyes widened, he came to a conclusion. It's my sacred gear. Sacred gears respond to its user's desires, and my desire currently is to go through a bulking phase and get stronger. My sacred gear is forcing my body to do all this. Shin thought. Is it dangerous? Is this going to affect me at all? Shin asked, needing to know if these levels of testosterone and estrogen would have any effect on him. Yes, it is definitely dangerous. You may be healthy right now, but if your testosterone and estrogen levels don't go down, you could be looking at damage to your heart, sudden rage episodes, or even strokes. The doctor told Shin. Well shit. But, if I think about it, it makes sense. Assuming this is my sacred gear reacting to my desires, then my desire was to get to 90 kilograms as quickly as possible. My sacred gear responded by doing the things necessary to do as such, resulting in these levels of testosterone and estrogen. So if I wanted to lower my levels, all I should need to do is change my desire to getting to 90 kilograms as quick as possible without causing any damage to my body. Shin thought. For now, I'm going to prescribe you these medications, the doctor said as he handed Shin several pill bottles. Take one of each of these pills every single morning. We will call you back in a week to see if it helps at all, the doctor said. All right, thanks doc, Shin said as he stood up and left the doctor's office, throwing all the pill bottles in the trash outside the hospital on his way out. Currently, because of his sacred gear, he now weighed 74 kilograms, which meant he had gained almost 20 kilograms over the course of 4 months. This kind of weight gain was just insane. At the rate he was gaining weight the past 2 days, if he kept at it like this, he would reach 90 kilograms in around 8 days. The question was, did he want to risk it and just let his sacred gear continue to go the way it was for 8 days and potentially cause damage to his body, or slow down so he reached 90 kilograms within the next 2 months? The more he thought about it, it didn't really matter either way. Once he did reach 90 kilograms, he would just cut anyways, which means his sacred gear would change his levels once again, and his sacred gear would give him the effects similar to anabolic steroids, which means he would cut at an extremely fast pace. It would only take 3 months at most to cut down. So, decided to play it the safest way possible. He decided he would extend his 6-month bulk to a 9-month bulk. Then he would cut for 3 months. This safest and healthiest option possible with the time he had. He just hoped he didn't grow any taller. He was already 6'3" in American terms. He didn't need to be any taller than that. You're Shin Hayadu, right? Shin looked to the right to see a girl standing a few meters away from him. Would you please be my boyfriend? The girl stated, looking at the ground with a huge blush on her face. It has been 8 months since his doctor's appointment, and he had changed a lot in that time. He had successfully bulked up to 90 kilograms, and then cut down to 80 kilograms, currently sitting at 11% body fat. Suffice to say, with his height of 190 centimeters or 6'3", and his current weight, he looked very similar to a calisthenics bodybuilder. Or, if it was easier to imagine, a professional football player. Finally, it's about time canon came. Although I wish I was more prepared for it. Currently, I'm just a strong human, but I might as well be a fly to supernatural beings. It definitely would have helped if I had learned more about my sacred gear. Shin thought as he tuned out the girl talking next to him. He already knew what she was going to say, as this was Yuma Amano or the fallen angel Rainer. Yay, sure, Shin said as he heard Yuma ask him out on a date. That's great, Yuma said with a large smile plastered on her face. If it wasn't for the fact that Shin already knew who she really was, he would be completely fooled by her. She was definitely an Oscar-worthy actor. Let's go on a date to Issei, Yuma said as she walked away. I really am happy you're my boyfriend, Yuma shouted to him as she left the walkway. Shin's hair blew in the wind as he looked over the bridge and at the sunset. He had made a habit of stopping here every day to watch as the sun set. It was always a nice sight to see the sky turn orange and reflect off the roofs of every car down below. Well, it looks like I'm going to die on Issei, Shin thought morbidly, although there was something that confused him greatly. He knew for a fact by now that he did not have the boosted gear, which meant Issei had it. So, why is Rainer targeting him instead of Issei? Obviously, a dragon gear would be more of a threat than whatever Shin had. Maybe it's because Shin already awakened his, so it was much easier to sense than Issei's. Oh well, he didn't want to dwell on it too much. Everything was going according to plan so far. Rainer asked him out on a date. Issei was 2 days away, so it seemed his life as a human was coming to an end soon. Looking to the side discreetly, he saw Kaneko watching him from behind a bush, licking a popsicle. Everything was going according to plan. This had to be one of the most boring things he had ever done. Walking around a shopping complex, buying various clothes and accessories and eating crepes. Honestly, who enjoys this kind of stuff? Was it a bad thing that he was looking forward to the end of the date, the part where he dies? Regardless, things were still going to plan. Rias' familiar has given him a summoning circle. He went on a boring-ass date with Yuma, and now they were approaching a fountain in the middle of a park that he recognized greatly as the place he is to be killed. Just like in the anime, Yuma skipped in front of him and stood a few feet away from him, her arms behind her back and leaning forward. He definitely understood how Issei thought Yuma wanted to kiss him with the way she was acting. Keyword, acting. Shin, can you do me a favor? To commemorate our first date, Yuma said as she slowly took steps forward, her generous bust bouncing with every step. Shin contemplated throwing the plan out the window and having sex with Yuma right here and now but decided against it. Yay, sure, Shin said with a charming smile. Standing right in front of Shin, Yuma leaned forward, her mouth pressing up against Shin's ear. Will you die for me? Yuma asked as she skipped back a few steps, a charming smile plastered on her face. Well, I'd prefer not to honestly. But hey, if you're into necrophilia, I have a buddy in the morgue who might be able to set you up. Although I should warn you, they're usually either mutilated or very old. Shin said, an all too serious look on his face. Yuma's face turned green with disgust as Shin said that. What the fuck? Yuma couldn't help but say out loud. Hey, it's alright. I won't judge you for any of your kinks, as long as you don't judge me for mine, Shin said, internally laughing his ass off. This had to be one of the funniest things he had done since being reincarnated. Okay, that's it, Yuma said as her clothes suddenly exploded, being replaced by the same BDSM outfit she wore in the anime, and her fallen angel wings came out from her back. Forming a spear, she threw it at Shin with full speed, impaling him in the stomach. Holy shit, this hurts. I mean, watching someone get hit by one of these is one thing, but holy fuck does this hurt. Shin thought as he fell down to his knees. You don't know how badly I've wanted to do that, Rainer said as she sat down against the fountain. And honestly, what in the hell is wrong with you? Necrophilia. Really? Rainer said as she let out a few laughs. Shin smirked at Rainer. I know this whole situation is bad with there being a giant hole in my stomach and all. But is it wrong that I am very turned on right now? Shin said, causing Rainer to choke on air. What the hell is wrong with you? Rainer yelled. I'm a guy staring at a hot, basically naked girl with big tits. Naturally, I'd be very turned on by that. Shin said as he coughed up some blood. I'm done with this shit, Rainer said as she just flew away and into a wormhole just as Rias' teleportation paper started to activate, a red glow starting to appear at the side of Shin. As he saw Rias appear, he just had to get the last word. Hey, Rias, how are you doing today? Mind helping me out? I landed on a rock and it's digging into my shoulder blade. It's very uncomfortable. I guess you could say I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, heh. Shin said before coughing up more blood, then promptly fainting due to blood loss. Rias just stared at Shin's unconscious body. You're an idiot, Rias said, despite knowing he couldn't hear her. You have a giant hole in your stomach, and you're worried about landing on a rock. Rias asked nobody in particular. Walking forward, Rias summoned her evil pieces. Don't worry, you won't die today, Rias said as she pulled out her pawn pieces. For the first time in almost a year, Shin was awoken by the sound of his alarm clock, usually being awake moment before it went off. Reaching over, he tapped the off button and rubbed his eyes, still feeling very tired. Not to self, getting stabbed in the stomach by giant light spears hurt, Shin said, surprised when he heard someone chuckle beside him. Well, isn't that an understatement? Rias said, laying next to him completely naked, not that Shin could see that due to her being covered by a blanket. Oh shit, Shin said, looking at Rias, but then realized this was the perfect time to finally make a joke he had been waiting to make for an entire year. Look, Rias, I am obligated by law to tell you that if we had sex last night, you may want to get tested for ligma, Shin said, his face completely serious. Rias, despite knowing they didn't have sex, found herself confused. Ligma, Rias asked slowly, never hearing of that STD. Smirking, Shin cackled madly on the inside. Ligma my balls. Huh, you have no idea how long I've been waiting to use that, Shin said as he started laughing madly. Rias' face went devoid of any emotion. Really? Rias said, not being able to believe the current situation. What? Shin asked, getting over his laughing fit. Did I do something wrong? Shin asked. No, nothing, Rias said, although a smile did come to her face eventually. Oh yay, Rias, Shin said, suddenly flipping over so he was laying over top of Rias, looking straight into her eyes. Why is it you're in my bed again? Shin said as his face dipped down into her neck, placing small kisses against it. Rias blushed as a small moan came from her mouth. Last night, you called out to me while you were dying. So, I came and saved you, Rias said, allowing her hands to wrap around Shin's back and trail the muscles on his back. Is that so? Shin asked rhetorically. I should give you a reward for that, shouldn't I? Shin asked rhetorically again, bringing his face up to her ear and nibbling on her earlobe. You aren't freaking out? Rias asked, surprised by the current situation. No, although I am curious, I am not freaking out. It would be rude of me to pay attention to something else when you are laying in my bed. Naked, Shin said against Rias' ear, causing shivers to run down her spine. With Shin being as attractive as he was, not to mention how attractive his body was, it was very tempting to just give in right there and let Shin have his way with her. But she needed to explain what happened last night to him. As much as I want to do this, we can't right now. We need to talk first, Rias said, moaning as Shin started suckling on her neck. Letting go of her neck, Shin brought his face up to look at Rias. I disagree, Shin said as he decided to throw caution to the wind and smash his lips against hers. At first, he felt Rias go stiff once he initiates the kiss, but mere seconds later she returned it with just as much passion. Moaning into the kiss, Rias gasped when she felt Shin's light trail down her side, sending shiver all throughout her body. Taking advantage of this, Shin took this opportunity to push his tongue into Rias' mouth, seeking out Rias' own tongue to initiate a fight for dominance. Rias responded in kind, using her tongues to fight back against Shin's. After a full minute of fighting for dominance, however, they had to separate in order to get a breath of air. Sorry, Shin, but that's all the further we can go at the moment, Rias said as she slid out from underneath him and sat up, the blanket falling off her body and showing her naked breast. Instantly, blood rushed down to Shin's lower bits when his eyes locked onto Rias' breast. After a lingering gaze, he forced his eyes to look up and into her own. All right, if you say so, Shin said, getting up and out of bed, not bothered in the slightest that he was naked in front of Rias. Well, I'm going to go make breakfast. You can tell me what you wanted to while I'm making it, Shin said, noticing the way Rias' eyes trailed over his body constantly as he slipped on a pair of boxers, Rias getting out of bed to put on her underwear that was currently laying on Shin's floor. My clothes got covered in your blood yesterday. Would you be so kind as to lend me one of your shirts? Rias asked, picking up her bloodied school uniform. Yay, that's fine, Shin said as he went to his closet and picked out one of his bigger shirts. Due to how tall he was, the shirt went all the way down to cover Ria's panties. Meanwhile, Shin got dressed in a simple white t-shirt and loose gray shorts. Come, I'll make you breakfast, Shin said as he walked out of his room and went to the kitchen to make breakfast as well as prep his meals. He could already tell today was going to be a long day. But he also knew the fun was about to begin. So, let me make sure I have all this correct. Yuma was actually one of these fallen angel people and killed me because I have a sacred gear. Luckily for me, I called out to you through a summoning paper you had given me, and you came in time to save my life. Shin asked, even if he knew it to be a fact, and knew much more than that. Yes, in a nutshell, Rias said as she sipped on the cup of orange juice Shin gave her. Okay, and you saved me by using one of those evil pieces things, which turned me into a devil just like you. Shin asked, receiving a nod from Rias. I see. So, then tell me. Suddenly, Shin crossed the room in the blink of an eye and had Rias pinned against the wall with his forearm against her neck. Why should I serve someone that just let me die? Shin asked with a dangerous tone to his voice. The only way you would have given me that summoning contract is if you knew what Yuma was going to do. I may be an idiot sometimes, but I am no fool, Shin said, the anger in his voice clearly present. I understand your anger. Let Shin push up against her neck harder. I don't want to hear bullshit or excuses. Tell me why. Why did you let me die? Shin asked, his eyes overshadowed. Because I was desperate, Rias replied, her face full of guilt. Letting go of her, Shin allowed her to drop to the floor, silently glad she didn't decide to just use her power of destruction to kill him. And please, do tell, what made you so desperate that you allowed for me to die, just to guarantee I would become a part of your peerage, instead of just asking me, Shin said, glaring down at Rias. Does it really matter? Rias asked, looking at the floor in remorse. Yes, Shin spat out with heavy amounts venom. Of course, he already knew the answer, and he couldn't actually be mad at her considering he allowed it to happen, as well as it being what he wanted to happen. I told you before that devils came up with the evil pieces to replenish our numbers after the war, Rias said, receiving a nod. Well, ever since then, pure-blood females have been getting married off to pure-blood males for the survival of the devil race, Rias said. And let me guess, this applies even to you, an heir to an entire clan, Shin asked, his voice losing some of the venom from before. Yes, I am to marry a man named Phoenix. He's a repulsive man that I'd rather die before marrying him and becoming his slave, Rias said hatefully. See, now was that so hard? Shin said mockingly but had lost all venom in his voice. Now that that's settled, we can discuss other matters, Shin said, causing Rias to stand up and look at him, massaging her neck slightly. And what would that be? Rias asked. My conditions on becoming a part of your peerage, of course, Shin said, causing Rias to gain an undignified look. Surely you don't expect me to serve you against my will, especially when you allowed me to die just to revive me as your slave. Tell me, how would that be any different from the situation you're trying to avoid currently with Riser? Shin asked. Rias looked down to the floor in shame once again. All right, what are your conditions? Rias asked. Simple really. I am not a slave, nor will I ever be. Don't expect me to follow your orders. If anything, all you can do is suggest to me to do something. In the end, the choice of whether I listen or not is up to me. So essentially, I want free will, Shin said. Is that all? Rias asked, refusing to look up from the floor. Yes, that's all, Shin said, knowing he could get more if he wanted, but didn't. There wasn't a point really. If you don't want to agree to those terms, then you might as well kill me because I'm telling you, whether you accept them or not, I will not take orders from anybody, Shin said. Very well, if that's what you want then so be it, Rias said, looking up and smiling at him. I'm glad to have you as a part of my peerage, Rias said. Well, I can't say I am happy as well considering I've been in it for a matter of a few hours, but so far it isn't bad, Shin said as he turned back to cooking his eggs that were now burned on the bottom. Now that he was a devil, however, the fun was going to begin. Shin entered the student council room, regardless of the fact that since his cycle was done, he was no longer eating 6 meals a day, switching to only 4 to maintain his current body weight. After the whole breakfast debacle, Rias had left, telling him she would bring him to the Orc after school and talk with him. Entering the student council room, he was met with the glare of the newest member of the student council, Saji Genshiro. Saji hated Shin with a passion, mostly due to the attention of all the girls in the student council gave him. It was no secret that Saji had a crush on every girl in the student council, Sona especially, but never got any attention from any of them due to Shin. What are you doing here? Saji said venomously. The usual. Play chess with Sona, flirt with Momo, and laugh at your pitiful insults, Shin said as he walked by Saji without a second glance, infuriating Saji. Hello Sona, how are you doing this morning? Shin asked as he reached her desk and sat down. Besides Saji making a fool of himself again, Sona asked, referencing what had just happened between Shin and Saji. Saji himself blushed in embarrassment at her words as he muttered a quiet apology to Sona. Fine, and you? Sona answers, a smile only shown whilst in Shin's presence showing. I'm doing great. I had a really good sleep last night. Slept like a corpse, Shin said as Momo in the corner of the room mumbled something about that being a weird analogy. Of course, that could be due in fact that I died yesterday, Shin said as he grabbed his chin and nodded sagely. Baruko Namira, who was sitting next to Momo, spit out the tea she was drinking. Huh, take that Hayaudu, Saji yelled, seemingly not understanding the importance of this situation. Sorry Saji, did you say something? Shin asked, making a white-haired man in an alternate world suddenly sneeze while Saji deflated back into his desk. What? You died? Momo yelled indifferently, standing up and her hands slammed into her desk. Fallen angel stabbed me with her lightsaber thing, and then when I fell with a giant hole in my stomach, I landed on a really pointy rock. So not only did I bleed to death, I did so in a really uncomfortable position, Shin said as he took a sip of water from a water bottle in his bag. Wait, if you died, how are you still alive? Saji asked from his desk. Oh, that's because I'm actually an immortal. I die all the time, but I always come back to life. Don't let my young appearance fool you, I'm actually over 700 years old, Shin said, causing everyone's jaw to drop. What? Really? That's awesome, Saji yelled, standing up and trying to fist bump Shin. No, I was lying. Rias used one of those evil peace things to revive me, Shin replied bluntly, causing Saji to deflate once again. So, I am assuming that Rias told you about the supernatural, Sona asked rhetorically. Yep, and how did that go over? Sona asked. Shin suddenly got flashbacks to the morning, waking up, telling a Ligma joke, having a heated makeout session, choking Rias, striking a deal with Rias. It went fine, Shin said. You didn't freak out? Baruko asked. No, I'm a sociopath so it didn't affect me, Shin said casually. What? The members of the student council yelled. I'm just kidding. I'm actually a time traveler from the future, sent back in time to save the world from catastrophe. This is what I wanted all along. In a way, that one was actually true. He did technically have future knowledge with which he could avoid things like trihexa, and he actually did want this all to happen all along. Really? That's awesome. Tell me, my future self, am I really cool and strong? Saji asked, getting all up in Shin's face. Actually, 2 years from now, a magician cast a spell on you that turns you into a girl. From then on, you become the #1 call girl in the underworld's most popular brothel, Shin said, causing Saji's face to go green with horror. You spend the rest of your days getting paid to have sex with fat old nobles and have 17 kids, all of which are pansexual, Shin said as if he was reciting the national anthem. By this point, Saji was curled in the corner of the room crying sorrowfully. Shin, stop messing around, Sona said dangerously. All right, you got me. I'm not really a sociopath nor a time traveler from the future. In reality, I already knew the supernatural world existed, Shin said, shocking all the members of the student council. You did, Tsubasa yelled from the corner. Yay, I figured it out 8 months ago when I read that book about the three-way war. I noticed that on the back of the cover, it said property of Sona Citri, so I went back at all the books I read, and they all said the same thing. After that, I decided to fuck with you all by hinting at the supernatural for 8 months, Shin said, causing them all to sweat drop while Sona blushed heavily. She couldn't believe she made such a careless mistake. Wait, then how did you know what my power was? Tsubaki asked, referring to the time he said he'd prefer to have her power. Oh, that's because I read some books Sona had on her desk that had detailed explanations of all of your powers, potential uses, as well as a lot of other information about you all, including your 3 sizes, Shin replied, causing them all to sweat drop again. Sona meanwhile was freaking out. She had a lot of things in that spreadsheet, a lot of things she didn't want to see others see. She just hoped Shin wouldn't speak about them. It also had several of Sona's sexual fantasies. Turns out she's a hardcore masochist, and her hopes were shot to hell just like that. Oh, and I can't forget about that one fantasy she wrote about having a threesome with her. Shin couldn't say any more due to Sona covering his mouth with her hands. An atomic blush on her face. Please, stop talking, Sona demanded/begged. After getting a nod from Shin, she let go of Shin's mouth. Now, you said Rias revived you. Do you know with what piece or how many? Sona asked, receiving a nod from Shin. Taking a long sip of his water for dramatic effect, he smacked his lips as afterward. A king piece, Shin, causing Sona's face to fall flat on the desk. Her head shooting up afterward, she yelled, that's not even possible. Oh yay, I forgot. It was definitely the jack, Shin said, causing Sona's face to fall onto her desk again. That's a card, not a chess piece, Sona yelled. Is it? Shin asked, tilting his head and feigning confusion. It was at this moment that the bell signaling first class rang. Just go to class, Sona groaned, figuring she'd just get the information from Rias later that day. Now the end of the school day, Shin was following Rias as she led him to the orc. In the anime, she had sent Kiba to do this, but since Rias and he were in the same class, that wasn't necessary. This is a really long path. Do you really need to be so far away from the school? Shin asked, not even able to see the old school building as of yet. As supernatural beings, it is only natural we stay away from humans. We would not want to be the ones responsible for the learning of the supernatural. Rias said, I get that, but I doubt you all went unnoticed this long if it was as simple as that. You guys do not have some kind of barrier or warding device that causes people not of supernatural origins to avoid the area? Shin asked. No, for a fact there was such a thing. Hell, he had been in one just yesterday with Yuma. Yes, we do, but there is still the chance of them still seeing something they aren't meant to see. Plus, it doesn't work so well, considering your brother and his friends are constantly running there after being chased by the kendo club. Rias said, smiling lightly. Yes, Issei. He's an idiot, Shin said bluntly. I guess that's one thing you have in common, as well as being a pervert, Rias said, teasing Shin. Yes, but unlike Issei, I have a lot more morals, such as I wouldn't peek on somebody. If I wanted to see someone naked, I'd seduce them, Shin said, causing Rias' face to a fault. That's pretty arrogant of you, Rias said. It worked on you, did it not? Shin said, resulting in Rias blushing. Plus, not only did I see you naked, but I also got to have a heated makeout session with you, Shin said, causing Rias' blush to go a deeper shade of red. Rias was not able to come up with a response, so stayed silent until they reached the old school building. Entering it, Shin wasn't surprised to see it looked exactly as shown in the anime, even the shower off to the side. A shower, Shin said as he stopped and looked inside of it, seeing a shower room with several shower heads all around the room. Yes, I actually live here in the old school building, and this is my shower, Rias said, causing Shin to nod sagely. Hey, Rias, Shin called, making Rias turn around and look at Shin. Want to go have sex in the shower? Shin asked, Rias' blush returning. No, we have more important matters to attend to, Rias said, flustered. All right. Shin disappointedly walked behind Rias once again, sulking until they entered the main room for the orc. The room that was always shown in the anime, looking exactly the same as before with Kaneko sitting on one couch and Kiba the other. He was sure Akino was in the room right next to this one making tea. Shin, welcome to the Occult Research Club, Rias said as she waved her hand around dramatically. The people you see are Kaneko Taoju, Rias signaled to Kaneko. Pleasure to meet you, senpai, Kaneko said, chewing on a chocolate bar. And this person is right here is Kiba Yuudo. Rias now signaled to Kiba. It's a pleasure to meet you, Shin, Kiba said, smiling with his eyes closed, giving off that knight in shining armor vibe. Shin ignored Kiba in favor of admiring Kaneko, this being the first time he saw her. Almost instantly, he was in love. Shin, even in his previous life, always tended to find the courtiers, especially the ones with silver or white hair, more attractive. Suddenly, Akino wheeled in a tray from the other room, a plate with several cups of teas placed on top. And there is the final member of the orc, but you already know her, Rias said. Hello, Shin, Akino said smiling. Would you like some tea? Akino asked, wheeling her cart over to him. Yes, thank you, Shin said as he took a cup of the tea and sat down next to Kaneko. Hello there, Shin said to Kaneko, the pretty boy smile he had spent the last year perfecting on display, yet it drew no reaction out of Kaneko. Kaneko only looked at him for a second, then went back to eat her chocolate bar. A courtier, I like that, Shin said, still getting no reaction out of Kaneko. However, this just made him more motivation to get one out of her. Damn, maybe Akino was rubbing off on him. Pervert, Kaneko said coldly, Shin taking no offense to it. Well, if you're done flirting, Shin, let's get down to business, Rias said as she walked over to her desk, Shin smirking slightly at the position the desk was put at. He found it quite amusing that her desk was placed on the elevated part of the floor, forcing everyone else to look up to her. He had no doubt this was a subtle power play on her part. And what would that business be? Shin asked. We need to explain to you your new devil duties, Rias said, snapping her finger as a bag of flyers appeared. As a low-class devil, your source of income is to do contracts. What you do is you go around town, handing out these flyers to people who you think would use them. If they do, they summon you to grant their wish. Following the law of equivalent exchange, they will give you whatever you deem an adequate payment, Rias said, tossing the bag to Shin. Shin caught it in one hand, stared at the contacts, then decided he would make his stand right here. Using what he knew of the DxD world, devil magic works simply by imagination. If you could imagine what you wanted to do, then you could do it. So, following that logic, he set the bag of contracts on fire. Yeah, about that. I don't do grunt work, Shin said as he walked over to the metal trash bin in the corner and dropped the bag of flyers into it, forming a fireball in his hand simply by imagination, and threw it at the bag. Wow, it really is as simple as imagining what you want to do. That's just fucking broken. As a weeb who has watched hundreds of anime, they're just begging me to recreate a bunch of moves, Shin thought as he watched the bag burn with fascination. Suffice to say, the members of the orc were shocked by Shin's actions, especially that he could create a fireball so easily, despite not having any prior teaching of how to use his demonic magic. Asked Shin, how did you do that? Rias asked, shocked and flustered. Shin smirked as he clenched his fist, lightning suddenly forming around his hand, the sound of birds chirping. I'm sorry, Kakashi, but I have officially just stolen your move, Shin thought as he watched his newly made Chidori crackle with glee. Unclenching his fist, the Chidori disappeared. The grin on his face, however, did not. I am about to rip off so many moves, Shin thought. How did you do all that? Rias asked, flabbergasted. I just imagined it happening. Like with the fireball. I simply imagined a fireball appearing in my hand, and then one did, Shin said, shocking them even further. That doesn't make any sense. Sure, demonic magic is power by imagination, but you don't even know how to circulate your magic throughout your body yet, so creating anything with magic should be impossible, Akino said, giving her insight into how demonic magic worked. Is that so? Shin asked, putting his palm out and willing another fireball to appear. This time, he took it a step further and made the fireball twirl around his hand, then threw it back and forth between each of his hands. Then if that's the case, it's most likely my sacred gear, Shin said. Your sacred gear. Do you know what it is? Rias asked, thinking that his sacred gear could be the cause of this, but even then, she hadn't heard of a sacred gear that made you instinctively use demonic magic. Nope, no idea, Shin said as he suddenly added 2 more fireballs, moving straight into juggling them. However, there really is no other explanation. As I wasn't born a devil, it's not likely it was instinct, and since I have no prior use of magic it wasn't experience either. The only explanation left is my sacred gear, whatever it is, Shin said. It was at this time that Rias finally noticed something, most likely not noticing it before due to her being so shocked by Shin's display of using demonic magic. Shin, I need you to take off your shirt, Rias ordered. My shirt. So then, taking me up on my offer of having sex in the shower, Shin asked cheekily, willing his fireballs to disappear. No, wait, it's gone, Rias said, now thoroughly confused. The instant Shin dispelled his fireballs, the thing she was sensing disappeared. What's gone? Shin asked, just as confused as Rias. Just take off your shirt, Rias said, walking towards Shin. Shin, not seeing a reason to say no, did as she asked and took his shirt off, thoroughly enjoying the way she blushed despite seeing him in this state this morning. Now turn around, Rias said, Shin, complying again. I don't get it. Is there something on my back? Shin asked. No, but earlier when you were using those fireballs, I sensed a strong aura coming from behind you, and since there wasn't anything behind you, Rias said, Shin, catching on to what she was saying. You figure that whatever my sacred gear is, that when it's in use, it does something to my back, Shin said. That would make sense. It would also explain why I haven't been able to notice my sacred gear. Unlike the boosted gear that takes up an entire forearm, if my sacred gear appears on my back, I would never see it. Shin thought to himself. Alright, now summon those fireballs again, Rias said, and Shin complied once again, willing the fireballs to appear, and judging by the gasp he heard from the 3 people behind him, something happened. This symbol. Shin, I know what your sacred gear is, Rias said, suggesting to the black symbol that now appeared on his back. Then, just slightly above it and to the left, was another, smaller, symbol. Alright, then please, do tell, Shin said, anxious to figure out what his sacred gear was, and if he knew of it. This symbol on your back, it's from Greek origins and means unity. This symbol appears on the back of people who have the sacred gear limitless body, Rias said, confusing Shin. This was something he had never heard of before, so it was likely something that was created when he was reincarnated into this world, meaning he had no knowledge of it. Alright, sounds strong. What does it do? Shin asked. Sadly, it's not as strong as it sounds. The ability of limitless body is that it adapts to anything, such as poisons or being burned. If someone with limitless body is poisoned by something, then the body adapts and becomes forever immune to it. The same goes with things like getting burned. Your body adapts and builds up a resistance to fire, forcing the flame to be hotter and hotter to do any damage, Rias said, although Shin could tell by her voice she was disappointed. However, the description of the gear never said anything about this, Rias said as she touched the second, smaller symbol. Aquino, go get me a book of Greek symbols. Aquino nodded, taking off, returning a few minutes later books in hand. After looking through the book, Rias finally found the corresponding symbol. According to this book, this symbol stands for control, Rias said, confused. Shin racked his brain, but it only took him a few minutes to figure out what that meant. Rias, could you take a picture or something of it? I want to see it for myself, Shin asked. Yay, sure, Rias said as she summoned a phone from thin air, most likely the same place she summoned those flyers from earlier. Hearing the snap from her phone, he turned around, grabbing the phone Rias was offering to him. Looking at the picture, it only took him a few seconds to deduct what the symbols likely stood for. He silently thanked all the MMOs he played that involved solving cryptograms and the like for quests. So, this is my sacred gear. Judging by how it looks, there's more to it than meets the eye. Control likely refers to control over my body and is probably the reason why I am so easily able to control my magic. If I had to guess, it grants complete control over the body, and I unlock due to my desires to gain weight, Shin thought, piecing together his sacred gear. And then there's the symbol for unity. Judging how it's much bigger than the symbol for control, it's the core of my sacred gear. But why is there only control, and in such an odd positioning as well? It's off-centered, which suggests there are more symbols I haven't yet unlocked, Shin thought, everyone now staring at him weirdly as he had been staring at the picture on the phone silently for several minutes now. So, if there are more symbols to unlock, then unity likely represents just that, the unity of all the symbols. I guess, once I unify all the symbols, it either unlocks balance, breaker, or evolves, Shin deduced, expertly putting his skills of deduction to use. However, his entire theory was reliant on the fact that control actually stood for control over the body. If it didn't, then he could be wrong about unity as well, which would mean he knew nothing. Luckily for him, however, he knew exactly how to test his theory. Closing his fist except for his pointer finger, he imagined his magic to come forth at the end of his pointer finger, taking on the shape of something akin to a slanted blade tip. And, just as he thought, it worked just fine. However, this wasn't the test. This was still control over magic, not body. So, using his pointer finger, he cut a line straight across his palm and willed himself not to bleed, and the effects were fascinating. There was his palm, a laceration straight across the front of his palm deep enough to see the veins underneath, yet no blood leak out. It stayed in and continued on its intended course. So, I was correct, Shin mumbled to himself, but Rias and the others heard him. What were you correct about? Rias asked. Looking up, he showed his palm to Rias, causing her eyes to widen. The symbol on my back, the one that stands for control. It represents one of the powers of my sacred gear. It grants complete control of my body. As my magic is an extension of my body, I have complete control over that as well. To put it simply, I only have to imagine what I want to happen, then my sacred gear will take care of the rest on its own. Shin said, That's all well and dandy, but I don't see how that could be super useful. I mean, it stops you from bleeding out and allows you perfect control over magic, but this sacred gear is supposed to be very close to Longinus class in terms of power. Control alone wouldn't make it that powerful, Aquino said from across the room. I think you underestimate the limits of control, as there really is none. It first started working its magic when it responded to my desires to bulk and get stronger. So, it forced my body to create more testosterone and estrogen, while also slowing down my metabolism so I would put on weight quicker. Shin said. Then, once it was time for me to cut, it changed my metabolism back, and then even sped it up, burning my fat at a much quicker rate than normal, mimicking the effects of anabolic steroids. Shin said. I think control alone is much stronger than you give it credit, Shin said, but as they probably still weren't convinced, he would need to do a demonstration. After all, controlling a fireball and creating some lightning is common in the supernatural world. So, he would just have to use magic they hadn't seen as of yet. Bringing his hand out, he pointed it at Aquino palm first. But since you underestimate it, I'll give you a demonstration. Everyone in the room was shocked when Aquino was seemingly grabbed by an invisible force and was sent flying towards Shin at high speeds, stopping right before Shin's pawn and floating in midair. What did you do? Rias asked, shocked. Simple. I willed my sacred gear to use what is known as attractive force to draw Aquino to me. I could also do the opposite and use what is known as repulsive force too. Shin said as similar to before, Aquino was sent flying backward at high speeds, stopping right where she was before dropping to the ground. If you need an analogy, then think about magnets. Usually, if magnets are by one another, they cling together on their own without any outside help, which is an attractive force. But then if you flip over one of the magnets, then they push away from each other. That would be a repulsive force. So, if it makes it easier, think of it as me turning Aquino and myself into magnets, and using the natural forces to do whatever I like. Shin said, shocking the members of the orc. However, I don't have to stop there. Attractive and negative force isn't the only natural force I could theoretically control. There is of course also. Suddenly everyone in the orc felt a weight drop down on their shoulders, making them feel much heavier than before. Gravity, and also so many more, Shin said just as the weight left their shoulders. Do you understand now how strong complete control over one's body, and by extension, magic is? As long as I can think of it, I can do it, Shin said, thinking of all the ways he could use this, but one in particular kept lingering in his mind, nagging at him. However, he wouldn't be able to do it until he was alone, because if it worked, it would cause chaos amongst the entire supernatural. I see. That indeed is very useful, Rias said, her eyes the size of dinner plates as she looked at Shin with awe and slight fear. Yes, it is, Shin said as he grabbed his shirt and put it back on. However, that really took a lot out of me. Note to self, just because you can do certain things, doesn't mean you should. Shin thought, beads of sweat dripping down his forehead. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go home. That really exhausted me, Shin said as he left the orc. Once Shin left the room, Rias looked over to Aquino. Are you all right? Rias asked, wondering if being used as Shin's guinea pig to test his attractive and repulsive force injured her at all, but Aquino's only response was to blush heavily. That magic, so strong, so dominating. And of course, instead of being injured she would just be turned on by it. Aquino, relay a message to Grafia explaining what happened. I think my big brother would like to know of the power of Shin's sacred gear. Judging by what he just showed, if there is even more to his sacred gear, it might be a Longinus class sacred gear. Rias said. Yes, but you, Aquino replied, regaining her composure. If things keep going the way they were, and Shin keeps improving at the rate he is, then I made the right choice in reincarnating him. It was a risk reincarnating him due to his sacred gear being unknown, but it looks like it will pay off. Shin might just be able to defeat Riser, Rias thought as she started doing paperwork at her desk. Shin was walking home after the events that just happened in the orc. However, he had other plans than just walking home. If he remembered correctly, if he stops by the fountain that Rainier killed him at, he should run into that fallen angel Dohnaseek. Now, don't misunderstand his actions. He's not looking to stick to canon and allow Dohnaseek to nearly kill him. Shin was after something else. He wanted to fight, to experience what a supernatural fight was like. It was something he had been looking forward to for a long time now. Plus, he needed to test the limits of his powers. Not to mention, this may also give him the chance to test a theory about his powers. When Shin arrived at the fountain, he looked around, admiring how good of a cleanup job Rias had done. You couldn't see a single trace that someone ever died here. That would change soon. Feeling a chill was down his spine, he knew it was time. Well, this really is unfortunate. Me running into you, that is, Dohnaseek said as he slowly walked toward Shin. Is that so? Shin said casually. Please do tell, why is it so unfortunate exactly? Shin asked. Dohnaseek suddenly looked up, glaring at Shin, hoping to scare him. However, it was unsuccessful as Shin didn't even flinch. Not going to run like the rest of your cowardly race, Dohnaseek mocked. Why would I run? I see no point in running, Shin said as he waited for Dohnaseek to make his move. Despite the confident facade he put up, he wasn't sure he would be able to beat Dohnaseek as he has no idea the limits of his powers or what they could accomplish. Very well then, Dohnaseek stated, forming a light spear in his hand, preparing for battle. All right, let's dance, Shin said as he shot forward, albeit slowly due to being newly reincarnated. And here I thought I was in for a good fight. It appears you were just in over your head, Dohnaseek said when he saw Shin's speed and threw the light spear at him, determined to get this over with. Shin, however, saw this coming so jumped to the side a bit. He continued running toward Dohnaseek, intent on combating him physically. Despite being able to control his magic perfectly, he still had a small magic reserve so he couldn't afford to casually throw around magic attacks just yet. Dohnaseek took notice of this and assumed Shin to be reincarnated as a rook, which would make sense as to why he was determined to make his physical. If that was the case, his worst mistake would be to allow him to get close as he would lose in a physical confrontation. Jumping backward, Dohnaseek was determined to make as much space as possible between the two of them. Shin, taking notice of this, focused on the area Dohnaseek was going to land and used repulsive force to knock Dohnaseek off balance once his feet got close to the ground. Without his balance, Dohnaseek fell backward, Shin arriving not even a second later, delivering a roundhouse kick into Dohnaseek's side whilst he was still airborne. His newfound devil strength proving to be quite strong as he heard something crack as Dohnaseek was sent flying to the side, bouncing off the ground multiple times. Dohnaseek groaned as he stopped skidding across the ground, now having several cracked and bruised ribs. However, he was aware enough to roll to the side just as Shin came barreling down on him from above. The place he was previously laying now turned into a foot-deep crater. Shin pulled his arm out of the concrete, disappointed he missed his opportunity to strike Dohnaseek with a Chidori. There is no doubt, though, that Chidori truly is an overpowered attack, a one-hit kill. If this is what it could do to concrete, what would it do to someone's body? Sadly, by the time Shin had pulled his arm out of the concrete, Dohnaseek was already in the process of delivering a kick of his own to Shin. However, unlike Dohnaseek, Shin had enough time to successfully put his arms into an X and stop the kick from hitting his side. That, however, did not stop him from being launched backward. Tumbling backward and doing several somersaults, Shin was able to gain his balance and land on his feet, skidding backwards still, noticing that Dohnaseek was already in the process of throwing a spear of light at him. This would be his opportunity. Lightning suddenly came to life in his hand once again as the sound of birds chirping reached everyone's ears, including the spectators who had arrived to watch the fight, also known as Rias, Akino, and Kaneko. Using all his strength to push off the ground, cracks were formed in the concrete as he shot forward at high speeds, the Chidori he had in his hand only making him even faster. At the trajectory he was going, he was charging the spear of light head-on. Kaneko was just about to make her move and kick the light spear out of the way when suddenly she was tossed backward by Shin's repulsive force, Shin knowing she was about to interfere with his fight. Shin had already made plans to deal with the spear of light on his path, thus shown when the spear got close to him, only to seemingly hit an invisible barrier and sent back at Dohnaseek. Dohnaseek, seeing his spear suddenly coming straight at him, dodged out of the way of it. However, Shin was right behind the spear, and Shin's attack didn't have a set trajectory. Dohnaseek looked in horror as Shin pulled his hand back, lightning fiercely whipping around everywhere. "Goodbye," Shin said as he thrust his hand forward, a sickening squelching sound being heard all throughout the park, causing the spectators to cringe with the exception of one in particular who grew a massive blush on her face. "D-damn," Dohnaseek said weakly as he coughed out blood, Shin's blinding Chidori dying down, showing Shin's hand completely embedded through Dohnaseek's chest, going straight out the back. Putting his hand against Dohnaseek's shoulder, he pushed Dohnaseek backward as he pulled his hand out of him. His hand covered in blood all the way to his forearm, drops of blood constantly dripping off his fingertips and onto the concrete below him. He put up a good fight, but this was destined to happen the instant you saw me, Shin said down to Dohnaseek, who was now laying on the ground with a humongous hole in his chest. "And I thought the hole in my stomach was big. Damn, this makes that look like nothing," Shin said as he noticed Dohnaseek had died mere seconds after being stabbed by his Chidori. "That was quite the attack, Shin. But did you have to throw Kaneko?" Rias asked, knowing Shin had noticed they were there when he used his powers to stop Kaneko from interfering in his fight. Shin looked at Kaneko, who was now covered in leaves and sticks, a rip across her shirt exposing part of her bra. "Sorry about that, Kaneko, but you were about to interfere in my fight. I couldn't let that happen. Not to mention, if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to stop my attack in time and I likely would have killed you instead of Dohnaseek," Shin said. Kaneko just glared at Shin, not happy in the slightest with what he did. "Well, I'll dispose of the body now," Rias said as she charged up her power of destruction and launched it. However, the attack was repelled, sending it off in an entirely different direction. Do not touch that body, Shin said dangerously, his hair overshadowing his eyes. Even now, he could still feel the holy energy being emitted by Dohnaseek. This was exactly what he needed to test his theory. And why not? We can't just leave the body of a fallen angel in a park. We have to destroy it, Rias said angrily. Because I said so. I need his body to test something, Shin said as he stepped in front of Dohnaseek's body and turned to look down at it. Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, seeing he was about to do something, shut up and took some steps back, giving him some room. Taking a deep breath, Shin focused solely on the holy energy being emitted from Dohnaseek's body and nothing else. Closing his eyes, he could still feel the energy, even stronger than before as well. He could feel it being emitted into the air, cycling around Dohnaseek's entire body. Then, he drew it towards himself, welcomed it into his body. Almost instantly, Shin dropped down to one knee as he absorbed some of Dohnaseek's holy energy, the most harmful substance in the universe to a devil. However, Shin didn't stop absorbing energy. Ignoring Rias' protests and demands for him to stop whatever he was doing, he continued absorbing more and more holy energy until he finally couldn't handle anymore and fainted. When Shin opened his eyes, he was in his bed. Seconds later, his alarm clock blaring to life. Reaching over, he turned it off, taking notice that his body felt very weak at the moment. Feeling something shift on his side, he looked over to find Rias naked in his bed once again. You're lucky to be alive, you know. You absorbed so much light energy that by all accounts, you should be dead. However, thanks to your sacred gear, you adapted to it and grew a resistance to the holy energy. Rias lectured Shin. Shin, however, knew different. That's simply what Rias thought happened. Rias was correct in assuming his body adapted to the holy energy and grew a resistance to it, but she also wrongly assumed that his body fought it off. No, he made sure it didn't do that in the slightest. He welcomed the holy energy into his body, using his complete control over his body to keep his demonic energy and light energy completely separated, not allowing it to invade his magic reserves. Instead, he created a second magic reserve, this one entirely comprised of holy energy, and even as he thought of this, he could feel his body changing, adapting to the holy energy, welcoming it, making it his own. Rias, Shin said, stopping her from ranting as she had been doing this whole time, which he had been ignoring. Yes, Rias asked aggravatedly. I have a sneaking suspicion about something that I need you to confirm, Shin said, standing up, taking notice that he was completely naked once again, and turned around, showing Rias his back. There is a new symbol on my back, correct? Shin asked. Rias, surprised, sat up and crawled to the edge of the bed, taking notice that what Shin said was true. Not only was there the symbol for unity and control, but now directly below unity was an entirely new symbol. This was one she recognized as well. Yes, there is a new one. This symbol, it's a very common one and means spirit. Any idea what that means? Rias asked. Say, I had my suspicions ever since you first told me about my sacred gear, but now I'm sure. You said when I awakened my sacred gear that its power was to adapt and grow resistance to things. Although that is correct, that is only half of the truth, Shin said. The second half of the adaptation is when you allow your body to acclimate it into yourself, become one with it. That's what the spirit symbol stands for, allowing things to become one with yourself. That holy energy I absorbed, it isn't being expunged from my body, it's becoming a part of me, Shin said, shocking Rias. You mean your body is actually changing in order to house holy energy? Rias asked as Shin went over to his dresser to put on a pair of underwear. Yes, that is what I mean, Shin said. However, there is a flaw. Despite the holy energy becoming one with me, my body is still that of a devil, not an angel or fallen angel, meaning my body won't produce any holy energy. I only have the holy energy that I absorb. Shin thought but decided to keep that to himself. Besides, he was already coming up with solutions for that problem. That's so simple. How come no one else has unlocked this ability of the sacred gear? Rias asked, confused. I don't know, Shin said, but considering this is the same world that seemingly doesn't understand how broken the concept of completely doubling one's power is, it's not surprising. Anyway, I'm going to get my day started, Shin said as he left the room to start his day, feeling too weak at the moment to flirt. Rias came downstairs a few minutes later to find a plate of breakfast ready for her. I'm surprised you didn't try anything like last time when you saw me naked in your bed, Rias teased as she sat down at the plate of eggs and bacon. Thank you for the food. Yes, I just can't be bothered to do so at the moment. Even though my body has adapted somewhat to the holy energy, it took a lot out of me to do so. I feel really weak and tired right now, Shin said as he sat down and started eating his breakfast as well. That's light poisoning. It's what happens to a devil when holy energy enters their body. They get light poisoning until the holy energy is completely gone from their body, or in your case until your body fully adapts to the light, Rias explained to Shin. I see, that makes sense. By the way, what did you do with Dohnaseek's body after I passed out? Shin asked as he went to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of Frank's Red Hot to put on his eggs. After you fainted, I destroyed it, Rias said. Shin sighed in disappointment. He was hoping he would be able to absorb more holy energy from Dohnaseek. However, that was only a tiny setback, one that could easily be replaced. Besides, there are currently 3 other fallen angels in Kyo right now. Finishing his breakfast, Shin rinsed his plate before putting it into the dishwasher and moved on to meal prep. You really eat fast, You know you don't have to inhale your food, right? Rias said as she hadn't finished neither her bacon nor her eggs. It's a subconscious thing. If you eat faster, you won't realize you're full until you're already done with your food, Shin said as he started grilling his meats. A few minutes later, Rias watched as Shin left to go upstairs, no doubt to get in his running clothes. She knew his daily schedule from when she had Kaneko watch him. However, she was surprised when he came downstairs in a pair of shorts and a blanket. That doesn't look like running clothes, Rias commented as she rinsed off her plate. As I said, I can't be bothered. I feel too weak and tired to run right now, so I'm just going to laze around and watch TV for the next 2 hours, Shin replied, laying down on the couch in the living room and turning on Flixnet. Now, let's see what movies this world ripped off Netflix has. Mind if I join? Rias asked as she leaned up against the couch. Go ahead, Shin replied. Wake up please, would you please wake up now? Or, you could just stay in bed, but I'm not going down on you. Wake up mister, wake up mister, wake up mister. The mantra was stopped when a hand pushed the button on top of the alarm clock. Issei groaned as he wiped the sleepiness from his eyes. He had stayed up all night watching a new porno with his friends and was now very tired. Getting out of bed, he put on his school's uniform. Whether it was clean or not, the world will never know. Walking into the hallway, the smell of his mother cooking breakfast assaulted him. Looking to the side, he sighed when he saw his older brother's room. Shin was always up before anyone else, left for school before anyone was up, and never gets back home until late. He knew his brother liked to be in good shape, but did he really have to be gone for the whole day? He and his parents very rarely got to see him. Releasing another sigh, he walked down the stairs. He sighed at his family's normalcy. Mother in the kitchen cooking the family breakfast. Father sitting at the table reading the newspaper. Older brother cuddling with the hottest girl he'd ever seen on the couch. Everything about his life was normal. Wait, Issei stopped dead in his tracks by the couch and slowly looked to the side. What the hell? No, this can't be happening. I'm just sleep deprived. Yay, that's it. There's no way this could be happening. Issei yelled in his mind. Wiping his eyes, he blinked several times, expecting the scene he saw in front of him to be gone, but it never disappeared. What the fuck? Issei yelled as he pointed down to Shin and Rias in utter shock. Shin and Rias looked at Issei. Oh, hey Issei, Shin said blandly, taking notice that Rias seemed to be amused by this situation. This is Rias Gremory, a person in my class. Shin introduced Rias to Issei. Of course, I already know who she is. She's one of the great ladies of Kyo Academy. What I want to know is what she is doing here. With you, Issei yelled. Oh, that. She's my girlfriend, Shin said, getting a subtle elbow into the ribs from Rias that he ignored. What? Issei yelled as his soul seemingly left his body from his mouth. Issei and Shin's mother coming a few seconds later and dragged Issei into the kitchen. Why did you call me your girlfriend? Rias asked shyly, a giant blush covering her face down to her neck. Because it's an easier explanation than what you actually are, Shin said as he turned back to watching the movie Rias and he were watching. Oh yay, and what would that be? Rias whispered huskily as she pushed her body up against Shin. Shin, seeing her game, decided two could play at that game. Flipping her over, Shin turned the tables as he took control. I don't know Rias, what do you want to be? Shin said as he traced his hand down her side, causing her to shiver in arousal. Rias bit her lip as she tried to think of a response. She didn't have time to think though as she felt Shin's hand stop rubbing her side and make its way up to grabbing her breast. Ask Shin. Your parents, Rias said, a blush unlike one Shin has ever seen on her face. Guess you'll just have to keep your voice down, Shin said as he looked over into the kitchen, seeing no one was currently watching. Rias let out a gasp as Shin's hand suddenly squeezed. Ask Shin. I can't keep my voice down, Rias said, panicked, not knowing what to do in this situation. Then I'll help you, Shin said as he brought his face down and smashed his lips into hers. It didn't take more than a second for Rias to respond in kind, giving into her lust and arousal, tracing her hands up in Shin's abs. Kids, breakfast is ready, Shin's mother called from the kitchen, causing him and Rias to groan in disappointment as they were forced to separate from one another. Coming, Shin said as he got up off the couch, expertly using his perfect control over his body to make blood stop rushing to certain places. He was certain there wasn't a single situation in which his control didn't come in handy. As everyone sat around the table, they ate breakfast, with the exception of Rias saying she was still full of the breakfast Shin made her. So, Shin, you are usually at school by now. What's so special about this morning? Shin's mother asked. I just felt really tired today. Yesterday was exhausting, Shin said as he started drinking the glass of orange juice his mother had given him. Shin's father glanced at Rias. I bet it was really exhausting. Shin's father chuckled at his own joke, to which Rias blushed. Shin, I shouldn't be expecting any grandchildren. Correct? Shin's mother asked, sweating coldly. In most situations, the accused would usually become flustered and stammer around. However, when it comes to Shin, nothing is normal. Please mom, don't be ridiculous. Rias is a Christian, Shin said sweetly, smiling. That's good to hear. My baby's still pure. And since she's a Christian, we only do anal. That way it's not premarital sex, Shin said, causing everyone, including Rias, to choke on whatever was in their mouth. Be it liquid, food, or just air. Well, that was a good breakfast, thanks, Mom. I'm going to be leaving now, Shin said as he left and went upstairs to change into his uniform, leaving the dumbfounded Hayato family plus one Rias Gremory at the table. I should probably go too, Rias said awkwardly as she quickly rushed out the house, already wearing her school uniform, all the while mumbling something about stupid idiots. Once Shin reached his room, he stopped and looked out the window, watching as Rias walked to school. With his theory tested and confirmed, his whole plan was just thrown off the rails. If his sacred gear had the ability to not only adapt and grow resistance to things but also adapt qualities as well, then that opened a lot of doors that were previously closed. The one that plagued his mind the most is something he swore to himself he would have to try. It was just a problem of how he was going to. This thought was that if he could absorb magic and acclimate it to himself fully and all that was required was something that gave off a magical signature, then what about the nothingness, aka, the dimensional gap? It was stated that Issei, the Ouroboros dragon god, was born from the nothingness. If this was true, could he become a life form similar to Issei? Could he really adapt to such magic, and what adverse effects would it have on him? What about sacred gears? Could he absorb the aura emitted by a sacred gear and adapt the powers of that sacred gear? If he went to Olympus and absorbed the energy of one of the god or goddess, would he too become a god? Was there a limit to his sacred gear, or is it just as the name implies? A body that truly has no limits, a body that can adapt and adopt qualities of anything with a magical signature. And the scariest thought of all was that he only had 2 symbols currently. Could there possibly be an even stronger power within his sacred gear? What was his sacred gear's balance breaker? With all these thoughts plaguing his mind, it only brought one more thought. How is it that this can actually be a sacred gear? Not even a Longinus at that. And what makes me the most curious, if this sacred gear was made by God, the head figure of the Christian religion, why are the symbols Greek? Is this really a sacred gear, or is this something else entirely? Shin thought as he watched Rias turn the corner, out of his sight. At the moment, nothing about his sacred gear made sense to him currently. Shin walked beside Issei as they made their way to school. Issei walking like a zombie due to the events of this morning. Issei still hadn't gotten over the shock of any of what happened, and was currently just working off of autopilot, not really paying attention to anything that was going on around him. Shin himself was listening to some music as he walked to school, planning out the next stages of his plan. He needed to find a way to expand his magic reserves. Unlike most other supernatural creatures, Shin's strength relied on his magic attacks and not his physical. He was similar to Sirzechs and Rias in that aspect. The problem was, he had no idea how to quickly expand his magic reserves. The only thing he could think of was in a forceful manner, similar to what he did with Dohnaseek. He could try using Rias or Sona as a battery and absorb some of the demonic energy emitted by them naturally as devils to forcefully expand his magic reserves. The problem with that was easiest explained with an analogy. In this case, the best way was to compare it to a balloon. When air is blown into a balloon, it expands past its normal state. Then, once the air leaves it, it returns to its original state but stretched out. The problem being that during the point where you're filling it up with air, you don't when it will pop. It was the same for his magic reserves. He could forcefully send magic into them, forcing them to stretch past their limits, then release the magic. This would expand his reserves, but he wouldn't have any way to tell when it was time to stop absorbing magic before he popped. His thoughts came to a halt when he was drawn to the noise of someone yelping as they fell down onto the hard concrete. Looking over, he was met with a teenage girl in the doggy-style position after falling, her panties there for the world to see. So, the time has already gone by this quickly, and now Asia has arrived in Kyoto. Shin thought as he peeked over to see Issei staring at her panties perversely. Slapping the back of Issei's head, Shin walked over to Asia and offered her a hand and catching her veil just as it flew off her head. Asia looked up, surprised to see Shin standing there, offering her a hand no less. However, Asia was not one to decline someone's acts of kindness, so she took his offered hand with no hesitation. "Thank you," Asia said as Shin helped pull her up off the ground. "It's no problem. Besides, I couldn't just leave you on the ground like that while my brother pervs seeing your panties," Shin said with a smile, causing Asia to blush and look behind her, seeing Issei standing there holding the back of his head in pain. "Oh, I didn't realize. Thank you, but I'm surprised you speak Italian," Asia said, her blush gone and now radiating kindness. Asia truly was just like she was depicted in the anime, pure-hearted. "Oh, yay, I know quite a few languages," Shin lied, knowing he could only understand her due to devils being able to understand almost all spoken languages. Looking over, Shin sighed as Issei continued to rub the back of his head. He didn't want Issei to get involved with the supernatural yet. He had a plan for when he would get Issei involved and how to benefit him, and it was too early at the moment for that. So, he couldn't let Issei walk with them. It may risk the chance of his dragon side acting up due to Asia Dragon Tamer status. "Hey Issei," Shin said, getting Issei's attention. "Go on to school, I'll help this girl with whatever she needs," Shin said, irritating Issei. "And what makes you think I can't help her?" Issei yelled, ticked off. "Well, for one, you don't speak Italian," Shin said calmly, causing Issei's face to drop. "And second, she needs help, not sexually harassed." Issei's eye returned once again but didn't say anything, instead deciding to stomp off to school angrily. Sorry for that, miss, Shin said as he looked down to Asia, handing her back the veil that flew off her head. Blushing out of embarrassment, Asia quickly took back the veil. I'm Shin Hayatu, it's a pleasure to meet you. Shin introduced himself. I'm Asia Argento, Asia said shyly. Judging by your clothes, you are a part of the church. Yes, Shin asked, Asia now looking at him with hope. Yes, I am. I'm actually new in this town and don't know my way there. You wouldn't happen to know where it is, do you? Asia asked hopefully. Yes, follow me, I'll take you there, Shin said as he grabbed her suitcase and started walking off, Asia hurriedly following after him, protesting him carrying her luggage as she didn't want to inconvenience him more than she already had. After watching Asia heal a boy's scrape on his knee, Shin decided to stray away from canon at this point. Asia, what you did? It was a sacred gear, wasn't it? Shin asked, causing Asia to look at him surprised. Yes. How did you know? Asia asked. Because I know of the supernatural world, Shin said, shocking Asia. In fact, I knew you were a part of the supernatural world the instant you said you were a part of the church in town, Shin said. How? Asia asked. Because the church in this town has been abandoned for several years and is currently being inhabited by fallen angels. Asia was shocked by Shin's information. Tell me the truth, Asia, you are really an excommunicated nun, aren't you? Shin expertly used his knowledge of the anime to use. Asia looked down, ashamed. Yes, I am, Asia said quietly, afraid of what Shin will do once he knows the truth. Thanks for telling me the truth, Asia, I appreciate it. In return, I will be truthful with you and tell you that I am a devil. Asia stopped in place, unable to walk, her hands shaking and now scared. Looking back, Shin gave her a smile. You don't have to worry, Asia, I don't want to hurt you. How do I know you're not lying? Asia asked frightfully. Because if I did, I would have done it already, Shin said, easing some of her worries, but they were still there. But I do not tell you all this for no reason. There is a reason I'm telling you all of this, Shin said. What's that? Asia asked, her hands stopping their shaking. I just wanted to warn you. The church you're going to is under the command of fallen angels, and trust me when I say they are not nice people. Shin paused for dramatic effect as well as giving Asia the chance to comment. However, she did not. Believe it or not, Asia, just a few days ago, I was human, Shin said, surprising Asia. However, one of the fallen angels commanding the church in this town found out I had a strong sacred gear and labeled me a threat. So, she killed me. What? Asia asked, appalled and shocked. She drove a spear of light into my stomach, regardless of the fact I had no information about the supernatural. Simply because I was a potential threat, Shin said. Luckily, however, a devil reincarnated me, giving me a second chance at life, Shin explained. I see, Asia said as she walked up to Shin. I'm sorry something so terrible happened to you, Asia said as she bowed to Shin. Asia, stand up straight. There is nothing to be sorry for, it was in no way your fault. Besides, it's not like I hate being a devil, Shin said as he started walking to the church with Asia again. But I just want you to know that you need to be careful around those fallen angels. I have no doubt in my mind that they have an ulterior motive to you being here than they told you. Oh, I see, Asia said, now panicking slightly but didn't show it. Their walk now awkwardly silent as they walked to the church. It wasn't until a few minutes later that Shin broke the silence. Asia, if you don't mind me asking, how come you were excommunicated from the church? You don't exactly strike me as the type of person to do something wrong, Shin asked. Asia shuffled uncomfortably, twiddling her fingers. I healed the wrong person, Asia said, Shin, looking to the side and giving her a look, edging her on to continue her story. I found a wounded man outside the church, and I healed him. Afterward, however, it was revealed he was a devil, so the church labeled me a heretic, Asia said, depressed. I see, Shin said. So then, tell me, Asia, do you regret that decision? Do you think you should have let that man die? Shin asked, causing a fire to appear in Asia's eyes. No, how could I just let someone die? Asia exclaimed. Then that's all that matters. You shouldn't live your life trying to please others nor making decisions based on what you think other people would want you to do. Stay true to yourself, what you believe, Shin said, Asia, staring at him in awe. Also, Asia, you should keep in mind that nothing in this world is born evil. Just because someone is a devil does not mean they are a bad person. Even Lucifer, the pinnacle of evil, was born innocent. An angel even, Shin said as he felt a tingle run down his hand, causing him to stop walking. Asia stopped right next to him. This is all the further I can go, Asia, Shin said as he looked to the side and saw the abandoned church. That is the church right there, Shin said as he pointed to the church. Asia looked at the church, nervous and afraid. Thank you, Shin. I appreciate you showing me the way, Asia said as she took her suitcase from Shin's hands and started to walk off but was stopped when Shin grabbed her arm. Looking over his shoulder, Shin gave Asia a smile. Like I said, Asia, you should live your life doing what you want, what you believe to be right. If you no longer want to go to that church, you don't have to, Shin said. Asia looked down at the ground. It was obvious she didn't want to. But, I don't have anywhere else to go, Asia said in despair, lost. She had no idea what to do. Shin stopped to think for a moment. He could invite Asia to his house right now, however, he didn't know what kind of butterfly effects that would have on the canon timeline. Just as Edward Lawrence proposed, one tiny alteration to the timeline can have disastrous consequences. Asia was an essential character to canon, and despite planning to veer away from it, it was still his strongest ally. Knowing what was to come in the future was a huge advantage no one else had. If he was to change Asia's path right now, what adverse effects would it have on canon? Luckily for Shin, however, he had been planning everything out for over a year, so he had already come up with the situations that would happen. Then how about you come with me? Shin asked Asia, offering her an out. I can't do that. We just met, and I've already inconvenienced you enough. Plus, I might just bring danger to you, Asia said shyly. Shin smiled and chuckled at Asia's innocence. Asia, there is no need to worry. Yes, the fallen angels are expecting you, but they don't even know that you are here yet. If you come with me now, they will assume you never came, Shin said, knowing it was the truth. However, this would have adverse effects. Asia was their whole reason for being in Kyo, which meant if Asia never comes, they will leave. The whole Rainier arc, the very first arc, will never have happened. Be that as it may, I still can't burden you with the responsibility of caring for me, Asia said. Don't be ridiculous, Asia. What kind of person would I be if I allowed you to just go to those fallen angels, knowing that they do not have something good planned for you? Shin reasoned, weakening Asia's resolve. Shin, seeing Asia was close, used his knowledge of her past to convince her. Besides, you're a good person, kind at heart and someone you can put your faith and trust in. You're the kind of person that is a great friend. I wouldn't want to let you go so easily, Shin said smiling, Asia's head shooting up as tears trickled at the corner of her eyes. You really mean that? We could be friend, Asia asked hopefully. Hook, line, sinker, Shin thought as he inwardly smirked. He didn't want to be arrogant or anything, but he thought of himself as an up and becoming a master of manipulation. Yes, of course, Asia. I don't have any reason to lie to you, Shin said, lying straight through his teeth. There were obvious benefits of swaying Asia to his side at the moment. Oh okay, if you say so, Asia said, looking up with a heartwarming smile. Alright then, follow me, Shin said as he pulled out his phone and started calling Sona. The phone rang a few times before Sona picked up. Shin, where are you? School starts in 4 minutes, Sona said irritably. She was usually pretty irritated with him when he doesn't show up at the student council room before school as usual. Yay, about that. I'm not going to make it to school today, Shin said calmly. What? Why not? Sona yelled. Shin looked to Asia by his side, looking at him confused since she didn't understand a word of Japanese. I met a hot blonde, Shin said, causing Sona to gain a tick mark on her forehead. That doesn't mean you can skip school, Sona yelled, furious and slightly jealous. I'm not coming to school today, Sona, Shin said seriously, the tone of his voice causing Sona to straighten, realizing that Shin was serious about this. Tell Rias I need to talk to her as soon as possible. I'll be at the Orc, Shin said as he hung up the phone and put it back into his pocket. Sorry about that, Asia. I had to call into school and tell them I wasn't coming today. Shin explained to Asia what he was doing, causing Asia to look down in shame. I'm sorry I made you miss school, Asia said as she bowed to Shin once again. Asia, you're too cute for your own good, Shin said as Asia's face went atomic, never having received such a compliment before. Asia stammered, not knowing how to react. Shin chuckled, quite amused by this situation. My point is proven, Shin said as he focused on what was to happen next. From this point on, canon was thrown out the window. He had just made a crack in the foundation of canon, and the next step in his plan would cause it to fall apart. However, he wouldn't be able to take that step until he had explained Asia's situation to Rias. After showing Asia around the Orc, Shin took a nap on the couch, determined to let his body rest and adapt to the light energy in his body. It wasn't until school was let out that he was awoken when Kaneko opened the doors to the Orc. His eyes fluttering open, he noticed across from him, on the couch opposite from the one he was taking a nap on, was Asia, her eyes closed and a line of drool coming out of her mouth. It would appear that after she took a shower in the large shower room Rias had in the Orc, she decided to sleep just like Shin. Hey there, Kaneko, Shin said as he slowly sat up, relishing in the re-energized feeling in his body. He could already tell that his body had now fully adjusted to the light energy in his body. Just a few days ago, he couldn't feel any magic in his body. Now, however, he could feel two completely different sources in his body. The main source, the magic that was being coursed throughout his veins, being emitted from his body, was demonic magic. The magic feeling like an ocean inside his stomach, several rivers being connected to the ocean and filtering the water in and out of his body at all moments. But then, right next to that saltwater ocean, was a freshwater lake. Polar opposites of the other yet coexisting. A dam blocking all the connections the lake had to the rivers, yet the dams ready to be burst open at any moment. All it would take was thought and the dams would break, flooding through his body. The only question is, what would happen if they opened? Would the demonic and holy energy fight each other, trying to become the only inhabitant of his body? Or would it be like oil and water? Would they separate themselves from one another, coexisting inside of him? He would test it soon. It was better to find out the effects sooner rather than later. Sitting up fully, he took a deep breath, relishing in regaining his energy. Glad he no longer felt weak and tired. This meant he would be able to move on with his plans. Scooting over on the couch, he patted the cushion next to him as he looked at Kaneko. Sorry I took your spot. I was feeling tired, Shin said as Kaneko sat down on the now open seat and pulled out a bag of chocolates. As she started to take bites of her chocolate, she stared at Asia confused as to who she was and why she was here. Noticing this, Shin knew he would have to explain this to her, but he'd prefer to wait until everyone else got here, not wanting to explain the situation more than one time. So, as time went by, the members of the Orc all arrived, Rias being the last person to arrive. They were now all seated on the couches, Asia having been awoken once Kiba arrived so he could sit down on the couch. Asia was now sitting in between Shin and Kaneko, nervous about the current situation. So, Shin, would you mind explaining who this is? Rias asked irritably. This was definitely not something she expected to see when she entered the Orc. She knew Shin wanted to talk to her, but she figured it had something to do with his sacred gear or something of the like. Not some blonde who she could faintly sense had a sacred gear. Shin sighed, already feeling a headache coming. This is Asia Argento, an excommunicated nun from the church, Shin said as he comfortingly put his arm around Asia in a protective manner, knowing the occupants of the Orc would not want to be associated with an excommunicated nun. Shin, why did you bring an excommunicated nun here? Rias asked, not liking this situation one bit, neither did Akino, Kiba, or Kaneko. Because she needed help, and to be honest I don't give two fucks what she is. The simple fact is she needed help, and I was inclined to give it to her. So, she is going to be staying with me for the foreseeable future. Shin, Asia shrinking into Shin's embrace for protection. You can't do that, Shin, she's an excommunicate nun. If the church found out about this, they would be in outrage. Rias informed Shin, but Shin wasn't looking to negotiate on the matter. I don't think you understand what I'm saying, Rias, Shin said dangerously. Here, let me put it in a simpler way. Not even NASA's new multi-million-dollar supercomputer could calculate how many fucks I don't give when it comes to who Asia used to be associated with, Shin said, causing the eyes of the Orc to narrow. The simple fact is that I already offered Asia my help, and I am not going back on my word. This has already been decided, and if you don't like it, then label me a stray, Shin said, the hidden threat his words obvious. Regardless of that, it is still risky. The only way I can think of avoiding the ire of the church would be to have her join my peerage, Rias said, stating her opinion on the matter. No, Shin said plainly, refusing to let Asia become a devil without her consent. If Asia wanted to become one, then very well. However, the choice was neither his nor Rias. Shin may not be the best in terms of being a good person, but he still had his morals and self-rules he carried over from his past life. One of those self-rules being that he would not force anything upon anyone. Excuse me, Rias asked, offended by Shin's immediate refusal. You heard me. It is Asia's choice and her choice alone when it comes to becoming a part of her peerage. However, she will not be forced into it. Now, Asia and I are leaving, I need to introduce her to my family. You're welcome to try and stop me, but I wouldn't recommend it. After stating his stance on the matter, he stood up, taking Asia with him, and left the Orc. None of the members made any move to stop him, knowing they couldn't afford to at the moment. After he left the Orc, he couldn't help but think how out of character what just happened for him was. This was the second time something like this has happened, the first time being when he pinned Rias against the wall the morning he found out he was reincarnated into a devil. He wasn't sure what the cause for these out-of-character actions. Whether it was something to do with his sacred gear, becoming a devil, or repressed emotions, he did not know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring you so much trouble, Asia said shamefully, feeling guilty for what had just happened. One could say that Asia is the cause for what just happened, but Shin did not fret over it. Don't worry about it, Asia. Despite Ria's words, she was just trying to turn the table so that it favored her. After all, she is a devil that has been spoiled all her life. She most likely felt your sacred gear and wanted you to be in her peerage so it would become stronger. There was never really any danger with the church, Shin explained. Even if the church finds out about this situation, it wouldn't even matter. Since you are an excommunicated nun, they do not have any right to raise anything anymore. They cut all ties with you when you were excommunicated. Shin's explanation eased Asia's worries slightly, but she still felt as if she had been bringing a lot of trouble to Shin. However, don't get the wrong idea about Rias. She is a good person. However, due to a situation she has been put into by her parents, her greed oftentimes gets the better of her, Shin said to Asia, not wanting Asia to dislike Rias. After all, they would most likely be spending a lot of time with one another. Well, let's get going. I have to introduce you to my parents, Shin said as he started walking off. As soon as he got this whole situation with Asia out of the way, he could finally do what he had been wanting to do all day long, go and confront the fallen angels at the abandoned church. The introduction of Asia to Shin's parents was, at the least, a memorable experience. Since Asia couldn't speak or understand a word of Japanese, he was the only one who understands what she said. Despite that, however, Shin's parents still welcomed her with open arms, as well as having Shin warn her about Issei and his perverted tendencies. Then, since the Hayadus did not have a guest room or a spare room, Asia's options were either living in the attic or move in with either Issei or Shin. Considering the attic was full of insulation and only 3 feet tall, she chose to move in with Shin for obvious reasons. After moving in all of her stuff, which was mainly just a bunch of clothes, Shin spent the rest of the day trying to teach Asia some Japanese so she could speak and understand important phrases. Later in the day, Shin was called by Rias, saying she needed to show him something, which ended up being the stray devil visor being killed. He was sure her hope was to incite some fear into him, the message basically saying this is what happens to strays. Now, however, he was ready to do what he had been looking forward to all day. Looking at the full moon outside his window, his eyes closed as he released a deep sigh of content, knowing a lot of things were going to change after today. Are you going somewhere, Shin? Asia asked from behind him in her sleepwear, a pair of blue pajamas. Yeah, I have something to take care of. Don't worry though, I'll be back before you know it, Shin said smiling, not wanting her to worry. All right, Asia replied smiling as well. After a few miles of walking, Shin arrived at his destination, somebody already there to welcome him. Sitting in a tree just a few meters away from him was a woman with the appearance of a young girl. Shin, however, knew her looks to be deceiving. Hello there, Shin said as he waved at her, causing her to look down in surprise, not knowing he was there. It was yet another useful ability of his sacred gear. With his control over his magic, he had completely suppressed it, making it impossible for even someone with the sensing abilities of Kaneko to detect. Phew, how did you sneak up on me? Middle yelled, shocked. Even now, Middle was shocked as do as she might, she couldn't sense anything from Shin. She couldn't tell if he was human or not, if he was powerful, or if he was dangerous. It was like he didn't even exist. That's irrelevant. Instead, could you please call your fallen friends? What I want involves all of you, Shin requested. And why would I do that? I can kill you myself, Middle exclaimed, jumping down from her position on the tree, a brief glance of her panties being shown to Shin. Landing on her feet, she glared at Shin, a spear of light forming in her hand, waiting for Shin to make a move. Perhaps it will change your mind if you knew I'm the reason for Dohnaseek's disappearance, Shin smugly stated, watching as Middle looked at Shin in shock and some fear. What? How do you know Dohnaseek? Middle yelled, now very cautious. Simple, Shin said as he released his control over his magic, allowing it Middle and the other fallen in the church nearby to sense his presence. Although not large nor did it give the feeling of someone strong, Shin was smart and knew how to use his magic in smart ways. I killed Dohnaseek. Middle was shaken by the statement, not knowing whether to believe Shin or not. After all, Shin didn't give off the presence of a strong person, but that didn't necessarily mean he wasn't capable of killing Dohnaseek. So then, are you going to call your friends? Shin asked, smiling way too innocently. Middle didn't have to be told thrice, flaring her magic to her fellow fallen as a signal to help her. In just a matter of seconds, the space near Middle started to warp as Rainier and Calawarner arrived. Seeing them arrive, Shin used this to cast a barrier, one unique to him and invisible to the eye as well as senses. Using his sacred gear, he set up a large dome of the repulsive force around all of the fallen as well as himself. No one would be able to leave, nor would anyone be able to get in. However, despite the barrier being invisible to senses, the spike in his magic when he formed it definitely was not, and he had no doubt Rias and her peerage would be coming very soon. Middle, what did you call us for? Calawarner asked, curious and also somewhat worried. With the disappearance of Dohnaseek, Middle suddenly calling for help was a worrying thing. It was likely whoever was behind Dohnaseek's disappearance was trying to do the same to Middle. Because this guy wanted me to. He says he killed Dohnaseek, Middle said, glaring at Shin. Luckily, due to the sudden arrival of the Rainier and Calawarner, they hadn't noticed when Shin spiked and created a barrier. Rainier and Calawarner's heads swiveled to Shin in surprise as they finally noticed his presence, Rainier recoiling in surprise. Ew, Rainier said, shocked seeing the person she thought she killed alive and well as apparently having been the one to kill Dohnaseek. Hey, long time no see. You know, last time I wasn't able to fully appreciate your body since I was, dying. But, now that I can, I give you a 10 out of 10, Shin said, both his hands sticking straight out, giving Rainier 2 thumbs up. Rainier, who is this person? Calawarner asked, confused about this entire situation. Rainier is your name. After you stabbed me with your lightsaber, I figured Yuma wasn't your real name. It's nice to know the name of the person that killed me, Shin said nonchalantly, making the 3 fallen angels uneasy. The way he could act so carefree in this situation worried them. He acted as if he didn't have any reason to consider them a threat. Rainier, this person, is he that kid with the sacred gear that you killed? Calawarner asked, piecing together the situation from what she had heard from Shin. Yes, that would be me, Shin confirmed for Calawarner. However, Rainier didn't know a devil had been keeping an eye on me. So, I was revived by that devil after Rainier killed me, Shin explained to the fallen. Are you kidding me? I went through that stupid, boring date for nothing. Rainier yelled, annoyed and outraged. Yes, Rainier. You tried so hard, and got so far, but in the end, it didn't even matter, Shin said, very proud of himself at the current moment in time. Rainier meanwhile looked at Shin, shocked and dumbfounded. Are you quoting Linkin Park? Rainier shouted, not having any idea how to react. What's the matter, Rainier? Find yourself one step closer to the edge. Are you about to break? Shin asked, Rainier releasing a very loud groan of frustration. By this point, Shin was trying very hard not to break out laughing at his own joke. However, Shin came here for a reason, and it wasn't to wittily insult people with song references, despite how fun it was. Anyway, I came here for a reason. I came to give you a chance, Shin said as his face suddenly went very serious. You're trespassing in the land of the Gremory and Sirzechs clans. Leave now or I will kill you. Consider yourselves warned, Shin said, the 3 fallen suddenly finding themselves on the wrong end of some killing intent. However, Rainier, Calawarner, and Middle were not new to killing intent. Each one of them had fought in the three-way war several centuries ago, and as such, had several centuries of combat experience. "And what makes you think we would listen to you?" Calawarner asked with quite a bit of spite in her voice. "There are 3 of us here, and only one of you. Don't think just because you're a devil now that you have the strength to kill 3 fall angels," Calawarner stated. Shin couldn't help but agree with her. Shin was reincarnated just a few days ago. By usual standards, he wouldn't even be able to kill an fallen angel, let alone 3. However, Shin was different. "So, is that a no?" Shin asked menacingly. "Yes, that's a no," Middle said confidently. "No matter what sacred gear you have, you won't be able to defeat all 3 of us," Middle claimed confidently, puffing out her rather small chest out in pride. "Is that so?" Shin asked rhetorically, letting his hand drop down to his side, his palm facing behind him, and exerting a good amount of repulsive force, propelling him forward at very fast speeds, just as a Chidori sprung to life in his other hand. Only second after Middle's statement, before they could even react, Rainier and Calawarner gasped in shock at what they saw. "I warned you," Shin said as Middle's body stood still, her eyes wide in pain as blood leaked out of both sides of her mouth. Shin pushed Middle backward, knowing she had already bled to death, as well as the fact that as Chidori went straight through her heart, she was dead in seconds. Middle, Calawarner, and Rainier screamed as they saw the lifeless body of their centuries-long friend fall to the ground with a giant hole where her chest used to be. "You know, it's pathetic really," Shin said as he turned toward the 2 fallen who were still alive. "You lot are centuries old, yet you're still at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to power. I know it's a foreign word to most you supernatural beings, but to imagine that if you spent your time training, you would probably be a Cotter-class fallen. Pathetic," Shin belittled. But the more he thought about it, the more pathetic he thought it to be. These people were several hundred years old, yet they were only as strong as a low-class devil. Vegeta would be rolling in his grave if he knew how little people trained in this world. "Now then, should I just kill you now?" Shin asked, knowing that if he wanted, he could just release a large amount of repulsive force that would shatter their organs and bones. Or he could release 2 different repulsive forces, and sandwich them between the 2, pushing the 2 forces together until they were squished to death. Or the most morbid one, repel their upper body away from him and attract their lower body towards him, which would rip them in half. He may not have the raw ability to double his own power or to create a magic that destroys anything it comes into contact with, but he did have technique. He knew how to use his magic in the most effective way possible. That's what made him strong. Or rather, that's what made him smart. "Calawarner, we have to go," Rainier said, her fight or flight senses tell her to get as far away as possible from Shin. Calawarner did not disagree in the slightest, deciding to follow Rainier's lead as their wings made their appearances and they took to the sky, a wormhole opening above them. However, before they could enter it, they found that something was stopping them from moving any further. Try as they might, whenever they tried to reach the wormhole, something constantly pushed against them, making it impossible to get to the wormhole. "Who said you could leave?" Shin asked from ground, making the 2 of them swivel their heads to the side in horror. They could suddenly feel Shin's magic spike in the air and the area grow cold, signaling Shin was launching an attack. Just as they thought, seconds before they both made their move to dodge, dozens of large spikes of ice appeared from the ground and came at them at very high speeds. Dodging to the side, Rainier released a gasp of pain as one of the spikes clipped her in the shoulder, impaling it. However, she considered her lucky when she looked to her side in horror after hearing Calawarner release a scream of pain, only to find her friend, a borderline sister, impaled in the stomach with one of the ice spikes. It was at this time that Shin noticed that Rias and her peerage arrived. Looking to the side, he saw them staring at the scene in front of them in complete and utter shock. However, he was surprised when he saw Sona and her peerage present as well. He was not expecting Sona to come to his aid as well when she felt his spike in magic. The help, however, was not needed. Looking away from them, he focused his attention on the only fallen angel still alive, the one who he had allowed to escape from his attack with only an ice spike to the shoulder. "Having a tough day?" Shin asked as the ice spike suddenly pulled back into the ground and disappeared, the ground being recovered by dirt, making it look like nothing had happened as the sound of Calawarner's body hitting the ground was heard by everyone. Rainier followed soon after, broken, without the will to fight anymore. She had seen her friends die right in front of her, and she knew there was no chance of her escaping. She had come to accept the fact that she would not be surviving this ordeal. "You know, I like to consider myself a good person, and I have my mother to thank for that," Shin said as he slowly walked towards Rainier. "And one of the things she taught me as a kid was that if somebody hurts you, you hurt them back tenfold. That's what I plan to do to you," Shin said as he stood right in front of her, looking down at her on her knees. Suddenly, 2 spikes of ice came out of the ground and impaled both her Achilles tendons, making it impossible for her to stand at the moment. Screaming in pain, Rainier thrashed around as she yelled. The spectators who were trying to get into the place but had not been able to thus far cringing when they heard Rainier's scream of pain. Well, with the exception of Aquino, since she suddenly grew a massive blush. "Please, just kill me," Rainier begged, no longer having the will to live. Seeing this, Shin decided to give her an out. Forming an ice spike in his hand, he dropped it right in front of Rainier, confusing her. "You want to die? Then go ahead, do it yourself, Shin said, silently enjoying the terror in Rainer's eyes. The spectators, however, were appalled and shocked at Shin's brutal display. They never expected someone like Shin, who was constantly telling jokes and making people laugh, could be so sadistic and cruel. You want me to kill myself? Rainer asked, shocked, staring at the spike of ice on the ground. What? Surprised, shocked that the innocent guy who makes stupid song references and makes comedically perverted jokes could be so brutal. Don't be. You've been alive for a long time, so you should already know. People like me, who have stupid personalities like that, just do it as a way to cope. As a way to fit in with everyone else. To hide how fucked up they really are, Shin said, shocking the spectators. For example, take a look at the four Mao. Sirzechs Lucifer puts on an act of being childish and an over-obsessive siskin. Seraphal Leviathan acts like a huge siskin and dresses like a magical girl. Adjika Beelzebub throws himself into science. Falbium Asmodeus sleeps constantly, no matter where he is or what he's doing. All just ways to cope with what they've seen, with what they've had to do. Shin stated. They may not have fought in the three-way war, but they witnessed it. And after it ended, they led the anti-Satan faction in the Devil's Civil War. Fighting your own, torturing your own, killing your own, and all while still being a teenager. It fucked them up. Their quirks and personalities are ways to cope with that. Shin ended his rant, Rias and Sona looking at Shin in complete shock. Rainer, seeing the person she hates above all else at the moment like this, decided to get back at him a little. Oh yeah, and what's your excuse? Why are you so fucked up? Rainer asked, catching the curiosity and somewhat horror of the spectators. Curious to what Shin would say, but also scared to know. If you're expecting me to say something like I watched my whole family die in front of me, you're thinking wrong. What fucked me up was just life itself, Shin said, although he knew if the entire truth wasn't. What do you mean? Rainer asked, thoroughly confused. Shin looked back at the spectators of all this, then looked back to Rainer. It wouldn't be a good idea to discuss what happened in his previous life in front of them. What's it matters? You're going to die anyway. There isn't any point in telling you, Shin said, causing Rainer to smirk, knowing she had begun to get under his skin. Is that so? Rainer said as she looked at the spectators watching the whole thing go down. Or is it that you don't want them to know? Rainer asked, looking at Shin with a smug smirk. Shin smiled innocently, basically confirming it for Rainer, before his hand suddenly shot forward, stabbing an ice spike into her chest. Rainer's eyes contorted in pain as blood leaked from her mouth. Consider us equal, Shin said as he let Rainer fall backward, falling onto the two spikes of ice that impaled her Achilles tendons, resulting in the spike of ice piercing into her shoulder blades. Unlike Middelt and Calawarner's deaths, Rainer's was not quick. Shin stabbed her in the lung, causing blood to slowly build up in her lungs, making it harder and harder to breathe until the point where her lung was so full of blood it started to overflow, coming out her throat and bubbling in her mouth as she tried to breathe, causing her to choke on the blood. As Rainer slowly died, Shin released the barrier, Saji, who had been constantly pushing up against the barrier, falling onto the ground as it was suddenly released. Hey look, I broke the barrier thing, Saji exclaimed proudly, puffing out his chest in pride. I released the barrier, you dumbass. The only thing broken here is your pride, Shin said, causing most of the girls to chuckle while Saji turned into a depressed mess. Shin, before what Rainer said, is it true? Do you not want us to know what happened to you? Sona asked, hurt that Shin didn't trust her enough to tell her, despite everything they've been through. It's not that I don't want you to know, but rather I don't know how to tell you, Shin said, but he still didn't know if it would be a good idea to explain to them why he was as messed up as he was. Shin, it's all right. Every one of us here has our own backstory. We won't think any less of you or judge you for what has happened to you, Momo said, coming up and grabbing Shin's hand. Taking a deep breath, Shin decided to tell them they had the right to know after all. He would just have to change a few things, like the fact that this world was just an anime where he comes from. All right, then tell me, do you believe in reincarnation? Shin asked, causing them to shake their heads. Well, I can tell you, it's real. It happened to me. Maybe I have memories of a previous life, maybe I was reincarnated into a different world. I don't know, but at the very least, I remember my previous life, Shin said, shocking everyone there. What happened in your previous life? Sona asked, shocked and curious. Well, I was born into a poverty-stricken family. Drunk, abusive father, druggy mother, an older sister, and a little brother. My father was unemployed most of the time, never being able to keep a job due to his drinking. So, to take out all his anger and self-hate, he would abuse my mother. My mother, needing a way to cope with the abuse, did a lot of drugs, Shin explained. Then, when I was about 8, after finding out she was pregnant again, my mother decided she didn't want to bring a baby into this world, knowing its life would horrible and filled with nothing but pain. So, she killed herself, jumped off a bridge, Shin said, drawing gasps from everyone. With the death of my mother, my father only became angrier, more of a drunk. My mother no longer there to take out his anger and self-hate on, he turned it onto us, his kids, Shin explained. My sister, who was 13, after a couple of months of getting abused, she couldn't take it anymore. So, she also killed herself, jumped off the same bridge as my mother. Then, my brother and I finally caught a break. 2 suicides within 2 months. That made the cops suspicious. The detectives investigated and found the true nature of my father, what he had done. My father was taken away and convicted for manslaughter. He got life in prison. Afterward, me and my brother were sent to live with our grandparents. It changed my life, and to cope with what had happened, I did anything to distract myself from it. Mainly video games and sports. And I lived a good life until I was 15. My brother, however, did not. My brother couldn't find a way to cope, so it just ate at him. He was just too messed up from what happened. When he was 13, 2 years younger than me, he started doing drugs. At 14, he got involved with a gang. As an initiation, he was forced to be a shooter in a robbery. However, the victim had a gun as well, and my brother ended up getting 3 rounds to the chest. He died. After my brother died, I just broke. I couldn't handle it anymore. I did anything and everything I could to repress my feeling. To get rid of them. Video games, sex, working out, drugs. You name it, I did it. Before I knew it, I was a high school dropout living life by stealing credit cards and identities. The last thing I remember was getting hit by a truck, and then I woke up here as Shin, the same age as my previous life. Shin explained, everyone present's thoroughly shocked. When I arrived here, I knew this was my second chance. My second chance to do things right, to make an honest living. New family, new identity, new body, new everything. A clean slate. However, those feelings from my past life, that anger, they never left. I just repressed them and pretended my previous life didn't exist. However, those feelings bottle over sometimes and spill out. Like the morning after Rias reincarnated me, Shin said, referring to when he pinned her to the wall. Or when I defended Asia, who reminded me so much of my older sister. Naive and innocent. Always smiling and trying to make everyone happy. Shin said, a tear falling down his cheek as he spoke about it. Or more recently, with Rainier, Shin said as he, as well as everyone else, looked at the dead fallen. Life fucked me over, and because of it, I have a lot of repressed feelings. They're a part of me, and they always will, that will never change. Shin said as he walked over to Rainier's body. Anyway, I have things I need to do, Shin said, repeating what he did with Dohnaseek. He started to absorb the holy energy of Rainier. Unlike his demonic magic, his holy magic didn't have a limit on how much he could hold. At the same time, however, he couldn't produce holy magic. But it would still come in handy to have a lot of holy magic at the ready at all times. Everyone couldn't help but do anything as they watched Shin absorb all the holy magic from all 3 fallen angels. Too shocked by Shin's backstory to do anything at the moment. Finishing up absorbing all the holy magic, Shin took a few minutes to catch his breath, feeling the effects of light poison kicking in again. Although his body had adapted to holy magic, it only adapted enough to contain the holy magic in his body, but now he had around 40 times as much holy magic in his body as before. If he was a fallen angel, he'd likely be a 4 or 6 winged fallen at this point. Look, I'm going to go home now. I'll talk to you all tomorrow, Shin said, not bothering to look back as he left, despite them telling him to stay. Wounds had been reopened, and then had salt poured on them. He just wanted to go home and sleep. Shin was on his knees, staring out his window, knowing this was the end. How did it come to this again? Oh, yay, that was right, he fucked up. He fucked up so bad, and now it was going to be the end of him. Behind him, staring at him with a curious gaze, was a man with long crimson hair. The man was Sirzechs Gremory, and he was here to kill him. You do know why I am here, correct? Sirzechs asked. Shin sighed. Yes, Rias told you about what I told her and everyone else. You're here to see how it's possible, Shin said. Sirzechs stepped forward, the light from the window gleaming against his eyes. Then you know what that means, right? Sirzechs asked yet again. Yes, you're going to kill me, and then I'm going to get dissected, Shin said as a bolt of lightning hit just outside, the raging storm not letting up one bit. Shin regretted his decision to tell everyone of his past the moment he spoke. He knew he made a mistake, he knew he wasn't thinking. He couldn't help but berate himself for being so stupid. Now, everyone involved with Rias or Sona was avoiding him, even Rias and Sona themselves. It was obvious what was happening. Someone had told someone else about Shin's previous life. The word was spread to a higher up, eventually reaching Sirzechs or Serafal's ears. No doubt, Ejuka heard about it eventually and wanted him right away. He would want to dissect the person capable of such a thing, to figure out what made them so special. Sure, reincarnation had been spoken of in some ways, such as being reborn as a baby, or a sacred gear being transferred to a new host once the previous one died. But this was an entirely different level. If such a thing was possible, and they could figure out what allowed Shin to retain his memories, then it would be possible to achieve true immortality. Such a thing was worth too much to pass up on, no matter how valuable the person is. Shin knew this was the end. There wasn't any way to get out of this. Of course, assuming that it's all true. You are awfully calm for someone who is about to die, Sirzechs said, analyzing Shin's reactions. Is that so? Shin asked, not worried in the slightest, and that little bit is what made Sirzechs falter. Seeing Shin smirk, he knew something was wrong, something wasn't right. Somehow, some way, he had to have planned this. It was only at this moment that Sirzechs realized what was going on. It's not true, is it? Sirzechs asked, causing Shin to chuckle, before laughing, then curling over and holding his stomach as he laughed very hard. Of course, it's not, Shin said. Come on, retaining information from a previous life. Please, if I had done so, I wouldn't have been stupid enough to reveal it so easily. Sirzechs was shocked, to say the least. I mean, come on, really. The tragic backstory was so cliché that you could open any manga and find one 10 times better, Shin said, causing Sirzechs to chuckle a little. So then, if this was all a ploy, what was the point in it? What's the end game here? Sirzechs asked, a bit doubtful. After all, if this was true, then Shin must be a very smart person to have planned this far ahead. The end game was you, Shin said plainly, causing Sirzechs to tense. I wanted to talk to you. But obviously, as a devil king, you can't just come to see someone simply because they want to talk to you. Even if I'm a part of your little sister's peerage. Shin explained his resolve, leaving Sirzechs utterly shocked. Sirzechs smirked. I will hand it to you, you're smart. But tell me, what role did the fallen angels play? Sirzechs asked, testing Shin. They were a pawn, something to use to sell my story, Shin explained. And the backstory? Sirzechs asked. A ploy to make you think I was dangerous. As it was, you would have likely sent someone else in your place if you didn't think I was a danger to Rias. However, if I was an emotionally unstable teenager, you would want to come to make sure Rias wasn't in any danger. Shin explained. The reincarnation part of the story? Sirzechs asked, sitting down on the side of Shin's bed. It was the eye-catcher. If I had just gone on about an edgy backstory, why would Rias tell you? What reason would she have to tell you her newest peerage member has an edgy backstory? A peerage member that has retained memory from a past life, however, now that would give her incentive to inform you about me. Shin explained. This caused Sirzechs to release a chuckle, marveling at Shin's well-thought-out plan. So then, the morning you pinned Rias to the wall is when it all started? Sirzechs asked. No, it started way before that, Shin said, causing Sirzechs' face to darken. So, you mean to tell me you already knew of the supernatural world? Sirzechs asked. Yes, I thought you would have known that. I figured Sona would have told us such. I found out about the supernatural world when reading the books in the student council room. After finding out about the supernatural, I hinted it to them in ways that were discreet, just toying with them for my amusement. Shin said, not bothered by the killing intent focused on him in the slightest. Then when exactly did this plan start? Sirzechs asked. It started when that fallen asked me on a date. By then, I had already awoken my sacred gear and could sense the difference between her and a human. Shin said, saying the first licensed Sirzechs entered the room. He couldn't sense anything different about Rainier when he met her, but he still knew she was a fallen. Alright, then how about this? Summarize your plan and tell me it, Sirzechs said, tired of getting bits and pieces of this plan of Shin's. Alright, my plan started with the fallen angel Rainier. She asked me on a date. I had been planning to get into Rias' peerage already, I just didn't know how. However, I knew they were watching me. I went along with the fallen, let her kill me, and then Rias revived me. The next morning, I pinned Rias to a wall, making her think I had a short fuse. From there the next step was killing Dohnaseek. I wanted to give Rias the impression that I didn't have a problem with killing. Next was the three fallen, where I made Rias think not only did I not have a problem with killing, but I enjoyed it. Next came the backstory to catch your attention. Obviously, the plan has worked up till now, Shin explained, making a simplified version of his plan. Okay, so then your plan worked. You have gotten my attention. What do you want? Sirzechs asked, a bit annoyed. Well, it's simple really. I want to make a deal with you, Shin said, standing up and turning around, looking straight at Sirzechs. I know of Rias' situation with Riser. I'll end it, Shin said, Sirzechs' eyebrows narrowing. And what do you get in exchange? Sirzechs asked dangerously, not liking one bit how Shin was using Rias as a pawn. I want you to make me a high-class devil if I end it, Shin said, suddenly feeling Sirzechs' killing intent come back in full right after his statement. Of course, Shin had assumed something like this and had already planned accordingly. Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you right now, Sirzechs asked, his power of destruction flaring to life and sparking off his fingers. Because I'm worth too much to lose, Shin said, causing Sirzechs' eyes to narrow. It's not surprising you wouldn't know. After all, Rias isn't the sharpest tool in the shack. Sirzechs' power of destruction grew stronger, causing Shin to smirk. He was really protective of Rias. My sacred gear's abilities at the current time is complete control over my body, and by extension, magic. On top of that, I have the ability to adapt to anything. You're a smart person, I'm sure you can see the potential, Shin explained, causing Sirzechs' power of destruction to disappear in an instant. Does that mean you could even adopt other magics? Sirzechs asked, shocked and intrigued. His question was answered when Shin suddenly formed a spear of light. Astonishing, Sirzechs said, marveling at how he could now feel the holy magic inside of Shin. He could feel two completely different magic reserves, one of which being demonic, the other holy. Yes, it really is amazing. However, you think too small. Sure, being able to adapt to magic alone is a power beyond value. However, I said it can adapt to anything. Sirzechs' eyes widened to epic proportions. So, you're finally seeing the big picture. Why stop at magic? If I can adapt the qualities of magic, why not adapt to the unique qualities of people? All I would need is some DNA, and if the person has something unique about them, such as your famous power of destruction, my sacred gear would adapt and take on the qualities, integrating it into myself. I would gain the power of destruction. And all it would take is something as simple as a drop of blood, Shin explained. Sirzechs was shaken. Such power was definitely too valuable to lose. They couldn't run the risk of losing it. It was then that he realized something. Don't tell me, you already. Sirzechs' statement was cut short when Shin held out his palm and an orb or power of destruction appeared in it. I and Rias have made out a few times. Saliva is as good as DNA as any, Shin said smugly, smirking from ear to ear. However, don't make the misconception that I don't care about Rias, or that she's merely a pawn. I do care for her, as both a friend and a potential love interest. Sirzechs scowled. And how do I know you won't end Rias' engagement whether you become a high-class devil for it or not? If she is a friend and a potential love interest as you say she is, would you really let her fall into the hands of someone else? Sirzechs asked rhetorically. Shin smirked. It was a good question. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. The question is, do you want to run that risk? Shin asked, tilting his head to the side. Sirzechs had no choice but to bite his tongue. I'll give it to you, you are smart. But don't think you will be able to do stuff like this in the future again and get away with it. The only reason you're alive today is because of the potential of your sacred gear, Sirzechs said as he stood up. I'd think less of you if I was able to, Shin said. So, I assume we have a deal then? Shin asked, knowing the answer already. Yes, if you end Rias' engagement to Riser, I will make sure you are awarded high-class devil stature, Sirzechs said, teleporting out of the room and finally allowing Shin the chance to breathe easy. Constantly antagonizing a man who could kill you with a flick of his wrist for almost half an hour was worrying to say the least. His entire plan rode on the fact that Sirzechs didn't just outright kill him. Luckily, Sirzechs was a smart person, so he knew not to do something so rash. And now that he had his position as a high-class devil secured, he had everything he wanted really. Now all that was needed was to defeat Riser. Now, he wouldn't have to act like a disturbed teenager anymore. However, it did come at the cost of everyone thinking he was one and that he had some edgy tragic backstory, but hey, it worked for Sasuke. Maybe it will work for him too. Walking down the street, Shin was carrying food in his hands. 3 bags from this world McDonald's as he arrived at the abandoned church. He had some people to visit. Walking into the abandoned church, he walked down the steps hidden behind a podium and walked into a room, watching as 3 people were trying to pull chains out of the wall. Smirking, he walked forward and cleared his throat, making his presence known to the 3. Middle, you were supposed to keep watch and tell us when he was coming. Rainer shouted, causing Middle to look down. Shin chuckled, amused. It's of no concern. I knew you would all try and escape anyways. With those chains connected to your neck suppress your supernatural powers. You're as strong as regular human at the moment, Shin said as he sat down on the front podium. This situation right here was the aftermath of his sacred gear, the control aspect of it. His sacred gear makes it to where he doesn't need to know the how to do anything he wanted to do. Just what he wanted to do. Whatever he desired, his sacred gear would feed on his magic and make it into reality. And so, when he made that dome barrier of repulsive force, it also acted as an illusion. He didn't know how when it came to how the illusion worked, but that was the beauty of his sacred gear. Whereas the spectators all saw Shin kill the 3 fallen angels, or at least, they thought they did. In reality, he had made an illusion that took effect on anyone not inside the dome. If anyone was to look in the dome, they would see the illusion, which was Shin killing the 3 fallen. However, what really happened was that Shin swiftly knocked the 3 out, then placed down 3 mannequins with illusions cast over them to look like the dead bodies of the 3 fallen. After he left, Rias destroyed what she thought was the body with her power of destruction. The only one who knew of the illusion was him, not even the 3 fallen knew of it. That led to this situation here, in which all 3 fallen were now locked in their old base, chained to the wall by their necks. What's the point in keeping us here? To use us as sex toys? Rainer asked spitefully, knowing it was likely the reason. The last thing she remembered before waking up was Shin pointing his hand at all 3 of them, then a feeling equivalent of being hit by a truck hitting her. Shin chuckled at Rainer. Sounds tempting, Shin said as he stood up, looking each of them up and down, making them squirm. However, I'm not a rapist, Shin said as he turned and grabbed the 3 bags. Here, eat, Shin said as he threw the 3 of them the bags. Despite being skeptic about what's in the food, their hunger got the better of them and they started digging in. So, if you do not keep us as sex slaves, then why are you keep us? Calawarner asked nervously. Shin walked up to them and pointed to the chains on their necks. For these chains, they don't just suppress your magic but absorbs all magic it comes into contact with. Then, when I want to, I just come along and Shin focused on the chains and started absorbing the magic inside of it, filling his body with more and more holy energy. Rainer, Middelt, and Calawarner watched in the scene in shock. How is that even possible? Middelt squeaked. It doesn't matter. The fact is that I can, and that's all you need to know. So, you asked me, what am I keep you for? Well, in short, your rechargeable batteries, Shin said, the 3's faces morphing into ones of horror. However, there is another option for you guys, Shin said, sitting back down on the podium. You could become my lackeys. Spies really. I'm not one to waste potential, and you lot have a lot of it. So, the option is yours, battery or spy, Shin said, crossing his arms and sitting back. The 3 fallen thought it through for a moment, all coming to the same conclusion. It was obvious what choice they were going to make. We'll be spies, the 3 said in unison, causing Shin to smirk. Great, that's good, Shin said as he walked up to all 3 of them and broke the chains. Afterward, he used his sacred gear to cast a spell on all three of them. Feeling something weird overcome their body, they look at Shin. What was that? Rainer asked worriedly. Oh, that. It was a spell. I basically embedded a bit of my magic into you, and it acts as a kill switch and warns me when your thoughts turn awry. That way, if you think about betraying me, I can activate the kill switch at any time, Shin said, inciting horror in all three of them. Although, that was only partially the truth. The spell was a kill switch, but it didn't warn him when they had thought of betraying him. However, they didn't need to know that. Anyway, I want you all to go back to whoever your boss is and tell them that whatever you were in QO for has failed. Then, I want you to return to your duties. I expect you all to meet me here every Tuesday. If you fail to do so, then I will kill you, Shin said, smiling innocently. All right, but don't you want to know who our boss is? Calawarner asked, confused. Shin turned around and started walking off, not bothered. No need, I already know who Kakobil is, as well as what you were planning to do with Asia. Anyway, I need to get to school. I have some things to clear up there. I'll see you all next week, and don't be late, Shin said as he left the church. All things considered, he thought things had gone pretty well. He had the position of high-class devil locked down. He got 3 spies in Kakobil's operation, and all it costed him was everyone he knew thinking he was a Mo. He was sure the Amo thing would blow over within a week. Shin walked silently down the street, enjoying the morning breeze upon his skin as he blissfully watched the beautiful sight of the sun rising from the horizon. The sky is painted red, reminding him of Rias and his current predicament with her, as well as every other devil at QO Academy. No doubt that not a single one of them expects to see him again, thinking he had already been cut open by Ajuka by now. He was looking forward to seeing their faces when they saw him again, alive and well. However, there still was the problem that they all thought he was some edgy Mo. He wasn't entirely sure how to fix that just yet. He could just let it ride out and fix itself, as it would eventually blow over. Or he could personally clear it up with them and tell them it was all a ruse. However, telling them that would bring up a whole lot of complications. He didn't want to deal with it. But now that the whole Rainier arc and all its problems were solved, he could focus on the Riser arc, which meant bringing forth the next stage of his plan. Then, once that arc was over, as a high-class devil, he could move on to bigger and better things. However, he would have to come up with a way to get himself off of Sirzechs' shit list. There is no doubt in Shin's mind that Sirzechs would jump at any chance to kill him at the moment. However, Shin had essentially used Rias as a pawn, which no question, pissed him off to no limit. Shin was suddenly forced to stop walking and lean up against a wall as he experienced a sudden case of vertigo, feeling the world spin around as his vision darkened, black spots appearing all over his vision. After a few seconds of it, the feeling passed. Shaking his head, Shin wiped his eyes of the black spots in his vision. The hell was that? Shin thought to himself, thinking over everything that could cause him to experience something like that. The first thing coming to mind was having low levels of sugar. However, his hands were steady as a surgeon at the moment, so that wasn't it. Another could be an ear infection. However, his ears weren't ringing, so that wouldn't make sense either. Which only left one other cause that he knew of, which was either drugs or alcohol, but he hadn't done either. Something wasn't right, he could feel it. However, for the moment, he couldn't diagnose the cause for sudden vertigo, so he would have to move on. If it happened again, it would become a problem he would need to get checked out. After going back home and completing his morning schedule, Shin was now on his way to school. He had 2 options, go to the student council room or the orc. Both groups would be gathered at the moment. However, there was one thing that came to mind. Knowing Sona, as she is expecting for Shin to be dead by this point, she has most probably already come up with a story explaining his death. That was something he didn't want to have to deal with, so he was going to have to nip that in the bud before it started. Arriving at the student council room, Shin walked in like it was just another day in his life. However, the gasps of surprise upon his entrance were not something he was used. However, it was something he had expected. Looking around at the confused faces, Shin smirked. What's the matter? Thought I'd be cut open on a table by now, Shin asked, Momo and Rhea looking down in shame. Sona, however, was by far the most confused. How? My sister told me you were going to be given to Ajuka, Sona said. Shin looked at her, not bothering to hide his disappointment. You know, a move like this I expect to see coming from Rias. After all, it wouldn't be her first time leaving me for dead. Shin paused. But for you, even after all we've been through, Shin said, the genuine hurt in his voice causing Sona to look down in shame and self-hate. I am sorry, Sona mumbled, refusing to look Shin in the eyes at the moment. Save it, Sona, apologies aren't going to fix this. I'm disappointed, really disappointed. But even more, disappointed that you actually believed that whole lie, Shin said, walking to his usual seat in front of her desk and sat down. Sona, despite being surprised, still refused to look up at Shin's face. It's not like I wanted to do it. I didn't have a choice, Sona said. Shin snorted. Really? You didn't have a choice? Who are you trying to convince of that, me or you? Shin said, resulting in Sona to sink even further in shame. You had a choice, you always have a choice. And you chose to leave me for dead. Shin said, however, it held no spite nor anger, only hurt and disappointment. As I said, I'm sorry. If I could take it back. Stop right there. Don't give me that if I knew then what I know now bullshit. You made your choice. Now stop making excuses and own up to your mistake, Shin said, irritated. Sona was acting like a child, blaming everyone and everything else but herself. Sona, unable to say anything, just gave a small nod of her head. Now, I'm going. I need to go have a conversation with Rias, Shin said, getting up out of his chair and slinging his bag over his back. Also, I'd appreciate it if you shredded up whatever situation you made up about my death. Sona was surprised he knew, but not that surprised. She knew Shin was a smart person. This level of prediction is child's play to Shin, and she knew that. How'd you know? Sona mumbled. Shin stopped in his movement of leaving the student council room. I like to think that I know you pretty well, Sona. However, recent decisions have shown otherwise, Shin said. Continuing his walk out of the room, he stopped right at the door, not looking back. If he had, he would have seen a few tears leak from Sona's eyes. Don't misunderstand, Sona. I do not hate you, nor do I hold any anger towards you. I still consider you a friend. However, the trust I once placed in you and the respect I had is gone. Shin said his final piece and left the room, shutting the door behind him. After Shin left, the entire room was silent. No one spoke a word. The only sound in the room being Sona's tears hitting her desk. Abruptly getting up, Sona started to form a teleportation circle. Excuse me, Sona said quickly before she left the room, not wanting anyone to see her break down. Shin now stood in front of the orc, preparing himself for the shitstorm that was about to ensue. He couldn't help but think back to what just happened in the student council room, however. The disappointment and hurt that was shown back there was all real. He had not expected Sona to arrive at the scene of him killing the three fallen. However, her decision to leave him for dead, it did hurt him. Every word he spoke was the truth and every feeling he expressed was genuine, which for Shin was a rare occurrence. Now, however, it was time to confront Rias, which unlike the confrontation with Sona, would not be so peaceful that he was sure of. Knowing Rias, she would take no responsibility at all for her actions and would show very little if not no remorse at all for what she did. Opening the door, he walked into the orc, hearing the sound of a cup breaking nearly the instant he entered the room. His attention drawn to it, he looked to the side and saw Rias look at him in shock, a broken cup at her feet. Shin, Rias exclaimed in surprise. Shin showed no emotion, remaining neutral. Surprised? Shin asked, giving even Kaneko a run for her money at the emotionless tone and front he had put up. You are, Rias stammered, unable to put together a complete sentence. I'm supposed to be dead. Cut open on a table, being examined under a microscope, Shin stated, still not showing any emotions. Rias didn't know how to respond. His whole situation was surprising to her. She had not expected to ever see Shin again. I would say I'm surprised or hurt by your actions, but really it's not surprising at all. This isn't the first time you've left me for dead anyway, Shin said, surprised when Rias looked away in remorse. It was something he wasn't expecting, to say the least. I'm sorry, Shin, but I had an obligation to report what you said. It wasn't my choice to have to dissect it, Rias said, this part not surprising Shin in the least. No, I get it. You had no choice. You had to let me die again, Shin sarcastically said. Tell me this though, Rias. What did you get out of it? Shin asked, Rias looking at him in surprise. What do you mean? Rias asked, nervous and surprised. Well, you were about to have one of your peerage members taken away without any say in the matter. A strong one at that. Obviously, they would give you compensation for such a thing. So, tell me, what were they going to give you in exchange? Shin asked, genuinely curious. Rias looked away, not wanting to answer. Rias, I'm going to find out one way or another. If not by you, then I'll have Sona ask her sister, and Sona would gladly do so in order to try and restore our strained relationship at the moment. Do you really want to add that on top of everything that you've done to me? Shin asked, some anger leaking into his voice. Rias sighed deeply. In exchange for you, since you were reincarnated with 8 pawn pieces, they would give me something I valued as equal value. I chose for my engagement to be nulled and all future ones as well, Rias said. Shin chuckled, expecting something like this. So, in the end, I served my purpose. You let me die the first time to annul your engagement anyway. And hey, look, I even got you future protection from other engagements. I more than served my purpose, didn't I? Shin sarcastically said, causing Rias to look down. Tell the truth, he'd prefer it if I was dead. Wouldn't you? Then you wouldn't have to ever worry about situations like forced marriages ever again, Shin said. This was the reason why Shin was upset with Rias and not Sona. Sona, although she told her sister about what she had witnessed, she didn't do it for personal gain, but instead out of a sense of obligation. Rias, however, fully used it to her advantage. Of course I wouldn't prefer that, Rias yelled. However, Shin didn't buy it. So, you're telling me you can look me in the eyes and say that you don't have a shred of disappointment that your deal fell through? Shin asked, unbelieving. Rias, responding to Shin, looked him dead in the eyes. I feel no disappointment at my deal falling through. You're important to me, Rias said, causing Shin to feel nothing but disgust. You disgust me. To so easily look me in the eyes like that and lie, Shin said, angered by her. That's not true, Rias defended. Bullshit. If that was true, the deal never would have been made in the first place, Shin said, Rias looking away at being called out on her lie. You dug your grave, Rias, now it's time to lay in it. Own up to your mistakes, admit you were wrong. Otherwise, there will be consequences, Shin said, Rias snapping her head towards him. Are you threatening me? Rias asked dangerously, narrowing her eyes at him. Shin just rolled his eyes, expecting this from her. She needed to learn some shame and humility. No, I'm telling you to grow up. If you want me to ever hold any respect towards you, then own up to your mistakes, Shin said, causing Rias to huff and look away. Shin just shook his head. He didn't expect anything more from her. All right, whatever. Well, you should know I made a deal with your brother. This caught Ria's attention, causing her to look back at him in wonder. I'll end your engagement with Riser. Ria's eyes widened, surprised. In an exchange, Sirzechs will make me a high-class devil. Rias was now thoroughly shocked. Once I become a high-class devil, I'll be cutting ties with you. Shin left the room after he said that, leaving Rias shocked. She couldn't believe what Shin had just said. It was at this moment that Aquino came out from the other room. He's right, you know. It's your decisions that put you in this decision. You need to own up to your mistakes, Aquino said, reasoning with Rias. Rias, hearing even Aquino reprimand her, finally realized her mistakes. What am I to do now? You heard him, he hated me, Rias said, falling backward onto the couch by her. Aquino shook her head at her master's naivety. Shin never once said that. However, if you do nothing, that may come true. You have until your engagement is null to make it up to Shin. Aquino explained. How am I supposed to make it up to him? Rias asked, lost. She had never had to fix a situation like this before. If I tell you that, you will learn nothing. I can't hold your hand through this, Rias. As Shin said, you dug your own grave, not it's time for you to lay in it, Aquino said before going back to whatever she was doing in the other room. Meanwhile, Rias sighed and sunk deeper into the couch. She had no clue how to make it up to Shin. The school day was awkward for Shin to say the very least. Since Rias sat right next to him, she spent the entire school day sneaking guilty glances at him but never made any move to say anything. It was both irritating and awkward. However, once school ended, the intercom had sounded out and called for Shin to come to the student council room. It would seem that Sona had something she wanted to talk with him about. He was curious about whether it would be an attempt to earn back his trust or for other reasons. Either way, Shin planned on going there. He just wished Rias would hurry up and get her head out of her ass so he could move on to the next stage of his plan, as the next stage heavily revolved around Rias and her peerage. Walking into the student council room, he took notice that Sona was the only person in there currently, which was weird considering school just ended. Normally everyone would be here at this time. This meant that Sona wanted to talk to him alone. So, what did you want me for, Sona? Shin asked, leaning up against the back wall. Sona pulled out a chessboard and set up the pieces, using her hand to signal Shin to sit in front of her. Shin sighed. If she wanted to drag out this whole thing, that was up to her. Taking the seat in front of her, they began their game of chess. Shin knew that Sona wouldn't call him here just to play a game of chess, but he was also a patient person, so didn't rush anything. Sona would talk to him about her reasons for bringing him here once she was ready. About halfway through the game, Sona finally decided to come out with what she brought him here for. Look, Shin, I know that betrayed your trust, and for that I am sorry. However, I am not sorry I told my sister what I heard. You may be my friend, but she is my sister. My loyalties lie with her, no matter how good a friend you are, Sona said, triggering a smile from Shin. Sona was confused when she saw Shin smile. She was expecting him to be angry, hurt, or even storm out of the room. Smiling, however, was not one of the things she expected to see from him. Why are you smiling? Sona confusedly asked. I'm smiling because you chose the right answer, Shin said, moving his piece on the chessboard and letting out a quick declaration of check. In fact, I would have thought less of you if you had so easily betrayed your sister, your own flesh and blood. You acknowledged that what you did was a betrayal of my trust. But you also saw that it was the correct thing to do. You get an A+, Shin said, Sona chuckling. Do you ever not manipulate people? Sona asked, amused by the situation. She had figured out after Shin had left that what she saw the day before was all a ruse. For what, she did not know. However, she had realized that Shin was putting on an act to convince them, or rather Rias, that he was unstable. Shin smirked and shrugged his shoulders. What can I say? It was not to put my innate talent of manipulating people to use, Shin said, watching bitterly as Sona made her next move in their game of chess. He was losing. And what of Rias? I am assuming you are also manipulating her into doing something, Sona said, causing Shin to chuckle at her deduction capabilities. Shin could not lie and say Sona was not a smart person. Yes, I am. However, it's not like the way I was manipulating you. I wanted to see if you would fold under pressure and betray your family. I wanted to see if you were a trustworthy person with good morals, Shin explained, Sona clicking her tongue once she noticed she had been played like a fiddle. However, with Rias, I want to teach her a lesson. More specifically, I want her to get her head out of her ass. Not expecting an answer like that from Shin, Sona couldn't stop herself from snorting in amusement. And how are you going to do that? Sona silently agreed with Shin. However, since Rias was one of her greatest friends, she would not openly say it aloud. That would be a betrayal of the friendship between the two of them. Well, I told her that I had made a deal with her brother. That deal is that if I end her engagement, he will grant me high-class devil status. Sona's eyes widened, catching on to the unsaid meaning to his words. So, you realize I used Rias to get to her brother. She didn't seem to catch on to that when I told her, but she isn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shack. Shin said, taking a dig at Ria's smarts. Just like that, everything fell into place in Sona's mind. Shin's reasoning for doing what he did, how he did it, and how he executed it. So, the entire thing was staged so you could make a deal with Sirzechs. So, you could cut corners and become a high-class devil much faster. Sona asked, wanting confirmation. Shin nodded. Sona had nailed the nail on the head. Yes, that brings me to how I'm going to get Ria's head out of her ass. I told her that if she didn't own up to her mistakes, I would cut ties with her once I beat Riser. I'm interested to see how she will react. Shin explained, Sona rolling her eyes in response. Knowing Rias, she won't do anything. At least, not without the interference of Aquino or someone else. Rias has been spoiled her whole life, always treated like a princess. Because of this, she expects everyone to treat her as such. She has too much pride to ever admit to herself, let alone someone else, that she made a mistake. Sona said, accurately explaining Ria's mindset. Exactly. That's what I'm trying to fix. However, I don't have too much faith that it will happen. Shin explained, clicking his tongue when Sona took his last rook piece. Sona smirked, acknowledging she had pushed Shin into a corner in their game of chess. And if she doesn't, what will you do? Sona asked, focusing on their game of chess. Shin sighed. I'm a man of my word, Sona. If she doesn't, I will cut ties with her. Shin said, causing Sona to stop and look up at Shin sharply, shocked. You would really cut ties with her? Sona asked, surprised. Why shouldn't I? Because she's hot. I may be a pervert, but my dick does not control my decisions. I'd rather not stick around someone who has no shame or humility. Shin said, although there also was the fact that despite Rias being super hot, there were people even hotter than her. Okay, then say you cut ties with her. Then what will you do? Sona wanted to know what Shin's plan was in the case that Rias didn't react that way Shin wanted her to do. Obviously, once Shin became a high-class devil, the only people he will have to answer to is the 4 Mao since he isn't tied to any household or group. He would be free to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Not sure, however, what I do know is that the supernatural world is a very big place. I think it would be nice to explore it, see what all it has to offer. Plus, I could even build up a strong peerage along the way. Shin explained, however, what he didn't say was that this was his plan no matter what happened in the future. Ever since coming to this world, he had wanted to explore the unmentioned parts of the anime. Everything he had done up until now was in future preparation for that. However, there were requirements he needed to do before he went and explored the rest of the supernatural world. The first being that he needed to be a high-class devil. If he wanted to go and explore the supernatural world, it would be essential to have a title to throw around for his own protection. Not to mention, it would be the perfect opportunity to find strong people to recruit into his peerage. The second would be strength. The supernatural world was just as dangerous as it was big. If he wanted to live the life of a wanderer exploring the supernatural world, he would need a lot of strength to protect himself. Otherwise, he would be killed. The third and final thing wasn't a requirement, but rather a preference, and it was what his current plan was working toward. First, however, he would need to get Ria's head out of her ass. If all went according to plan, it would be completed before the Riser fight. Shin deflated when Sona declared checkmate, knocking over his king. Congratulations, you whined again. Anyways, I'm going to be going now. I need to take Asia clothes shopping and teach her some more Japanese, Shin said, standing up. However, when he stood up, he got a sudden head rush. The head rush quickly evolved into the same feeling of vertigo he felt from this morning, however much stronger. His legs wobbled as he felt the entire world spinning, his vision blurry and obscured by black dots. Stumbling, he stumbled into the wall, using it to try and keep himself standing. Shin, what's wrong? Sona asked alarmed, standing up and rushing over to Shin to try and help him in whatever way she could. Shin, feeling something wet hit, his lip brought his hand to it and felt it, then looked at his finger, seeing them now caked in blood. Something isn't right, Shin said, feeling more and more blood come out of his nose, even evolving when he felt trickle of blood come out of his eyes and trail down his cheeks. Suddenly, feeling his stomach churn, he fell to his knees in pain, as if someone had stabbed him in the stomach. Vomiting globs of blood, he knew something bad was happening inside of his body. Vomiting even more blood, it now caked the carpet floor as he saw the veins in his arms bulge up before bursting. Fuck, this definitely isn't good, Shin said, falling onto the ground, distantly hearing Sona's panic screams the whole way down as he lost consciousness. Shin's eyes fluttered, hearing only the sound of a repetitious beeping. However, the light above him was so blinding, and his eyelids felt so damn heavy at the moment. Releasing a grunt, suddenly an overwhelming soreness of his entire body hit him. Hearing a shuffling beside him, he slowly looked to the side while trying to open his heavy eyelids. After several tried, he was finally able to open them wide enough to see and was greeted by the sight of a rather luxurious hospital room. The room's hospital bed he was on was in reality a queen-sized bed with a luxurious white headrest with gold trimmings. The mattress was the softest he had ever felt, although he didn't pay much attention to that due to his body's soreness. All around the rooms were various paintings that Shin was sure cost more than he could ever imagine, as well as a TV that was more akin to a holographic display as it was just a wooden table with a long and thin black projector sitting on top of it, projecting a crystal clear image, which at the moment was just a background of beautiful flowery meadow with the time in the bottom right corner. Then, right next to him, was a couch. The couch had purple cushions, a white wood as the support, and once again a gold trim that made the couch seem very luxurious. Sitting on the couch, looking at Shin worriedly, was Sona. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes were all wrinkled. It was obvious she had been previously sleeping on the couch. "Shin, you're awake," Sona said, surprised and relieved, hurriedly pressing a button on a remote stationed on the bedside table near Shin. "Sona, what are you doing here? And where the hell am I?" Shin said as he very slowly and meticulously sat up, groaning all the way up due to his body's soreness. Sona stood up and walked over to Shin and sat on the bed beside him, putting her hand on his forearm for comfort. "You're in a hospital in Sitri territory," Sona explained, resulting in the widening of Shin's eyes. If he was in a hospital in Sitri territory, then that meant he was currently in the underworld, which indirectly meant that whatever was wrong with him was serious enough that he had to be brought to the underworld's best hospital to receive treatment. "What's wrong with me? It can't be something little if I had to be brought to the underworld to receive treatment," Shin asked, worried. He wasn't a doctor, so he had no clue as to what was wrong with him. All he knows is that when your veins explode and you vomit blood, that something is wrong. The cause for it, however, he had no idea. "I don't know. Since I am not family, the doctors will not tell me without your permission. Doctor-patient privilege and all that. However, since my family owns this hospital, I pulled enough strings to allow me to at least visit you out of visiting hours," Sona explained. "I see. Well then, how long have I been out?" Shin asked. "You've been unconscious for 5 years," Sona said, causing Shin to suddenly choke on air. The shock was almost enough to send him back into unconsciousness. However, Sona's chuckle stopped him from doing so. Looking at her, she was smirking amusedly at him. "You're fucking with me?" Shin said, ticked off. You were unconscious for 2 days. At first, we brought you to the hospital in Kyo, however, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with you after running all the tests they could. So, I brought you here," Sona explained, and it was at this time that the door to Shin's room hurriedly opened. In came 2 nurses and a doctor, hurriedly telling Sona to get out of the way, to which she complied. The nurses wasted no time in getting to work, one using a pump thing on his arm, the other using a small flashlight to test his eyes, telling him to look this way and that way. The usual stuff nurses do. Meanwhile, the doctor read over a paper and waited for the nurses to be done. After a few minutes, the nurses stepped out of the way and allowed the doctor to talk to Shin. "Hello Mr. Hayadu, I am the doctor that has been treating you. My name is Marco Sitri, a member of the Sitri clan," the doctor said as he extended his hand. Shin, responding in kind, albeit slowly and painfully, shook the doctor's hand. "Now, for proper procedure, I'm going to need to ask you if you're okay with Miss Sitri being present for this. The decision is yours," the doctor asked. Shin, looking over to Sona, seeing her worried face, he couldn't help but feel happy. He didn't expect Sona to have gone so far for him. "It's all right. She's done this much for me. It's only right that I allow her to know what put me in this situation," Shin said, Sona smiling at Shin appreciatively. "All right, then I have some routine questions to ask you," the doctor said, moving on to questions such as his birthday, if he had any allergies, if he had any previous serious injuries, was he on any medications, was he sexually active. The usual questions you get asked when you go into the doctor. After asking them, the doctor put the clipboard he was holding down onto the desk and pulled out a chair that had wheels on it, wheeling on over to Shin. "All right, then all that's left is to explain what happened to you. Now, a lot of things happened when you were with Miss Sitri, and it all boils down to your magic attacking you," the doctor explained, confusing Shin. "My magic attacked me. Why would it do that?" Shin asked, utterly confused. "Well, your sacred gear, which Rias Gremory so graciously explained to us, allowed you to absorb energy and contain it within your body, something which was unprecedented until now." "Correct?" the doctor asked, receiving a nod from Shin. "You see, although your sacred gear is, in fact, limitless, your body is another story. You see, everyone's body is only able to handle so much. In this case, you exceeded the limit of how much magic your body could hold at once. At most, your body is able to hold the lower end of high-class magic, and no more. You, however, had the demonic reserves of a low-class devil on the higher spectrum, as well as a holy energy equivalent to a high-class angel, one of 8 wings at the very least. This was simply way too much magic for your body to hold," the doctor explained. "So, my body eventually gave out on trying to contain it, which resulted in the magic being spread throughout my body and attacking me," Shin assumed, receiving a nod from the doctor. Shin cursed himself for being so stupid. He had been so greedy, so consumed at the prospect of gaining more power, that he had overlooked the simple fact that he was not ready yet. That his body was not yet ready to handle such power. Yes, and your body was damaged in 3 places specifically the most. The first was your brain. It was the first thing it attacked. It was the cause for your vertigo, as well as the blood that came out of your nose and eyes. Second, it attacked your liver, which was why you were vomiting blood. Finally, it also attacked your heart, causing it to pump way too much blood, which caused your veins to blow. The doctor listed off, causing Shin to fall into despair. Once again, Shin was not a doctor, but he didn't have to be one to see that this was not good. "Is there any permanent damage?" Shin asked, his hands shaking in worry. "When you came in, the first thing we did was seal off your holy magic, which allowed your body to regain control of your magic and stop the attacking. Second, we used a phoenix tear to try and halt the decline of your organs. Luckily, the damage to your brain was almost completely healed. The doctor explained. Almost, Shin said, worried. Yes, it's nothing serious. It will heal within the next week, but for now, things like standing up too quickly, bright lights, and exertion could cause vertigo or migraines. It's a slap on the wrist considering all the things that could have gone wrong. The doctor explained, easing some of Shin's worries. The damage to your liver was completely healed, and there is nothing to indicate that it was ever damaged. Your heart, however, that's a completely different story. And just like that, Shin once again fell into despair. Although the phoenix tear did halt your heart from being damaged any further, it could not heal the damage done, and quite frankly, you would not survive open heart surgery. The damage done to your heart is too extensive, it can't be repaired. At the current moment in time, I give you a year, 2 if you're lucky to live, and at most 6 months before you're bedridden. The doctor explained, Sona and Shin both falling into despair. Luckily, while you were unconscious, we did implant a pacemaker, which will help you keep a regular heartbeat. However, it won't make a difference in the long run when it comes to how long your heart will last. The doctor explained. What about a heart transplant? Won't it solve the problem? Sona asked, her eyes a bit watery. It's not possible, Shin said. He already knew the seriousness of this situation. Quite frankly, Shin was screwed. He wouldn't have any way to get a heart transplant. And how would you know? Did you suddenly become a doctor? Sona said to Shin, about to go off on him. However, the doctor stopped her from doing so. Actually, Miss Citri, Mr. Hayato is correct. There is a complication in the possibility of a heart transplant. That being Mr. Hayato's blood type, AB. It is only found in less than 1% of the population, and on top of that, the heart would have to be of a human who was reincarnated as a devil, just like Mr. Hayato. Frankly, he would have a higher chance of winning the lottery 7 times in a row. The doctor explained, causing Sona to quiet down, now realizing how dire Shin's situation was. Is there even anyone with the same blood type as me that has been reincarnated as a devil? Shin asked, his voice devoid of any hope. No, the doctor said. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayato, but there isn't any possibility of a heart transplant. The doctor stated. Neither Sona nor Shin saying a word. I'll leave you to yourselves, the doctor said as he stood up and left the room, the 2 nurses following after him. Even after the doctor and the nurses had left the room, there still wasn't a single word spoken. There was only silence, the only sound in the room being the continuous beeping signaling Shin's heartbeat. Sona, Shin said quietly, drawing her attention. Please, don't tell anybody about this, Shin requested of her. Why not? This isn't something you should hide, Sona said, stating her opinion on the matter. Because I don't want to spend the rest of my time being coddled by people, treating me like glass. I'd rather die sooner and happy than later and miserable, Shin explained, Sona looking down, silent. Fine, if that's what you want. But don't take this as me agreeing with your decision, Sona said, causing Shin to nod in gratefulness. Slowly, and painfully due to bruises and sore muscles, he swung his feet over the edge of the bed and stood up. Shin, you shouldn't be standing up, Sona said, coming around the bed and trying to get him to sit back down on the bed. However, Shin just shrugged off all her attempts and walked over to the window, looking out into the beautiful landscape of the Citri territory. I'll be fine. Bruises are formed when blood leaks into the skin. With me conscious, I'll be able to heal the bruises quickly. My sore muscles will heal by me forcing my body to generate more stem cells. It will make the muscles heal quickly as well. I should be fine within the next few hours, Shin said as he took a deep breath, wincing when the breath made a shooting pain go throughout his body. All his plans had been shot to hell and he only had himself to blame for it. Of course, there were solutions to his problem, however, they were out of reach. For one, Hafei's or Great Red, as well as anyone else with similar powers, could make him a new body. However, they have no reason to do that, nor does Shin know how to get in contact with him. If he was going to die, he wasn't going to spend his time walking around on eggshells, not knowing when his heart was going to give out. If he was going to die, then he was going to make the most of the rest of the time he has left, even if it ends up shortening that time. Let's go. I hate hospitals and I'm sure my family is worried about me, Shin said as he turned around, ignoring his body screaming at him to sit down. 6 hours later, Shin had finally got home. It took several minutes of arguing with Sona and then his doctor to get released from the hospital. Then it took several hours for them to get back home due to them having to take the train from the underworld to the human realm. However, one upside was that within that time, his bruises had already fully healed and his muscles were perfectly fine. He was as good as new, well with the exception of a very unhealthy heart. His family had been relieved to see that he was home and fine. Apparently, Sona had told them that he was scouted by a college and that he had been there for the 3 days checking the campus out. It wasn't a horrible excuse, but it wasn't good either. However, with the application of magic, it was very believable. After his parents' ambush of questions, he got to his room with Asia and explained everything that happened to him, as well as what was wrong with him. He didn't want to, however, he needed to know if Asia's sacred gear could possibly help his situation. It couldn't. Next, he ingested some of Asia's blood, hoping that he would be able to isolate her blood type and adapt it to himself, essentially changing his blood type. Then it might be possible to get a heart transplant as Asia was a common blood type. It didn't work either. The only way he would be able to get a heart transplant is if his body was suddenly drained of every ounce of blood he had, somehow still stay alive despite that, and survive long enough to have a successful heart transplant. That simply wasn't possible for more ways than one. He considered turning into Orochimaru and hot bodies. However, he had no idea how to do that, nor did he even want to do that. He tried healing his heart with stem cells, but that didn't work either. Over the course of 2 days, he tried everything he could think of. However, none of it even had the slightest hint of working. He was screwed. So, after coming to the conclusion that he was not going to be able to get out of the situation, he decided to hell with it, and he would throw caution to the wind and continue with his plans. Everybody has to die sometime, and it wouldn't be his first time dying either. On his way out of school ground after school, he was intent on just going to the gym and have a big leg day. If he happened to have a heart attack while deadlifting, then it'd be the gym's problem, not his. However, during class, Rias had told him to stop by the orc. Evidently there was something important she had to tell him that he needed to know. Walking into the orc, he figured it had to be pretty important considering everyone was currently gathered there. Usually, it would only be Rias and Akino. Occasionally Kaneko or Kiba would be there as well. However, all 4 of them there was not usual. At least one person was almost always on a contract or doing something else. What is it that you needed? Is this about what happened 4 days ago? If so, I'd rather just leave, Shin said, not feeling like entertaining Rias' whims at the moment. He had much better things to do. No, it's not about that, Rias said. Deciding to take her word for it, Shin nodded and sat next to Kaneko. I have talked with Sona, and she has agreed to let us go and get you a familiar from the familiar forest as tonight is the full moon, Rias said, confusing Shin. He thought Rias and Sona fought over that opportunity with a dodgeball game. But now Sona was allowing them to go to the familiar forest. That didn't make any sense. As far as he knew, several of Sona's peerage members needed familiars. Why would she just give up her chance to get familiars with her servants? Unless, Shin was now annoyed. He was going to have a talk with Sona. For now, however, he was unimportant. That's great. When can we go? Shin asked, although he already knew the answer. We can go now. Akino. Rias signaled to Akino, who then started to form the teleportation circle to the familiar forest, everyone walking over to the open space in the room where everyone would teleport to and from. It didn't take more than 10 seconds for them to arrive in the crisp air of the familiar forest. The place looked admittedly creepy. With all the dead trees, the fog, the full moon, it was a scenery straight out of a horror movie. How something with dead trees everywhere was considered a forest was beyond Shin. Its name definitely didn't match the place. This is the familiar forest. Not much of a forest, Shin said, walking around. Not this part per se, however, the familiar forest is a very big place. There is a rainforest, plains, a tundra, an arctic, and a desert in the familiar forest. Where you are now in is the plains. As you can see, it's basically dead, someone said from out of nowhere, drawing everyone's attention. The person looked like an otaku who watched way too much Pokémon and was dressed as Ash Ketchum. Alright, who the fuck is this? Shin said, looking at the rather old man dressed as a child standing up in a tree proudly. Did he not realize how ridiculous he looked? My name is Zataoji, the familiar master. The guy kept ranting, however, Shin was having none of it and just walked off. Shin, where are you going? Rias yelled to him, Zataoji seemingly not even realizing that Shin was leaving as he continued his rant about cute and powerful familiars. Do you seriously think I'm going to put my life in the hands of that guy? Shin said, pointing at Zataoji, causing everyone to take a glance at Zataoji, then nodded in agreement and left with Shin, Zataoji still not realizing they had even left. They walked for over an hour and saw a wide variety of familiars. They saw imps, minotaurs, orcs, even a 9-headed hydra that Rias begged Shin to try and get. Shin was uninterested in any of them. He was not here looking for a strong familiar, or even a useful familiar for that matter. Shin's way of thinking was that if you wanted a strong familiar, then you were incompetent and needed someone to fight your battles for you. Shin wasn't about that, all he wanted was a companion. Currently, the 5 of them were walking through a mountainy area, snow covering it everywhere. In the distance, Shin, look over there. It's an ice wyvern. That would be a fantastic familiar. Shin stopped, looked at the familiar, then looked away. Not interested, Shin said, continuing his walk through the Arctic area as everyone shivered but him. Hell, Kiba had icicles coming out of his nose. How are you not cold? Kiba yelled, shivering like a leaf. Fire magic, was all Shin said, continuing their walk with everyone, with the exception of Kaneko, complaining the whole way. However, Shin was not leaving without a familiar. Suddenly, while walking through a foresty part of the Arctic area, Shin heard a very quiet sound of snow being packed down, signaling something was walking very close to them. Looking around, he could not spot it at all, however, meaning that it likely blended in with its surroundings and was likely stalking them, waiting for an opportunity to strike. You guys stay here, I have to pee, Shin said, walking off. He knew after a while of them walking without the creature striking, that it wouldn't strike while they were all grouped up, which likely meant it was smart. It didn't want to fight while outnumbered. However, if he was singled out, then the creature would attack. It was a gamble, considering it could end up being strong and kill him, and with his heart, fighting anything strong would result in his heart possibly giving out due to exertion. However, Shin likes to live life on the edge. After walking out of sight of the other four, who had already sat down and started a fire to get themselves warm, Shin stopped and just stood still, waiting for the creature to attack, and he didn't have to wait long. Hearing something jumping behind him, he turned around, raised his hand, his palm facing whatever was attacking him, and released a very strong amount of repulsive force. He was just glad that this sort of magic had no toll on his body at this level. Although the amount of repulsive force was very strong, that was because it was a natural force. It didn't take much of it to be strong. The amount of force he released would be the equivalent of being hit by a 2,000 kilogram semi going 100 miles per hour. Suffice to say, the force he released hit the creature, causing it to release a loud yelp, then proceeded to go on and uproot and break trees for several hundred feet. Meanwhile, the creature he attacked with the attack was blown back several dozen yards. Judging by how far it was knocked back, Shin predicted it to weigh about 150 kilograms, maybe 175 kilograms. Walking after it, no doubt Rias and everyone was now rushing towards him after feeling him release that much force, which had actually managed to blow away all the snow on the ground in a very wide area for several miles. Shin, are you all right? We felt you release a big attack. Whoa. Rias stopped behind him, awed at the damage Shin had done to the forest. I'm fine. Just seeing what attacked me, Shin said, walking for a little bit before arriving at the creature, who was whimpering painfully with each breath it took. It turned out to be a wolf, a very big wolf, approximately 4 feet tall when standing on all 4 legs. It was a shame really that Shin had killed it. However, he didn't have much choice. It would have made a good familiar. However, just because this one was dead didn't mean there wasn't another somewhere. Without a word spoken, Shin walked back to where Rias and all of them had a fire running, and then walked over to where he had been hearing the wolf stalking them, just as he hoped after searching for a few minutes. The wolf's tracks. Since it wasn't snowing at the moment, and the wolf was around 150 kilograms, it left very clear tracks. Come on, these tracks will likely trace back to that wolf's den. Since it wasn't traveling in a pack, it likely doesn't have one. Wolves are a pack mentality creature. If they have a pack, then they always hunt for food in the pack, Shin said to the others, not giving them any say as he tracked the wolf's tracks for several miles. After half an hour of tracking the tracks, Shin thankful for a devil's ability to see in the night, it had led them to what Shin was hoping for, although he was a little disappointed, to be honest. Around 50 feet away from where Shin was standing, he could see a little white wolf, most likely a newborn as its eyes were still blue. For those who don't know, wolves can be born with a multitude of eye colors, just like humans. However, with age, generally 6 to 8 weeks, their eyes will turn either a shade of yellow or brown. Shin walked forward, unworried about other wolves. He had checked, and the wolf he had killed was a female. Since it was a female, hunting by itself, it likely meant it had no pack, and likely very desperate. Mother wolves very rarely ever leave their pups, or in this case, pup, alone. Walking up to the little wolf pup, Shin smiles, amused as it hadn't even noticed him, much more preoccupied with chewing a bone, one that was almost as big as it. It didn't even notice him until he was a foot away from it, to which the puppy looked up at Shin innocent and curious. Shin, in his last life, had been a big dog person. He had grown up with dogs his whole life, from the moment he was born basically. In his previous life, his family had 2 huskies and an English shepherd. Thus, he knew a lot about dogs, and by extension, wolves. So, crouching down slowly, as to not scare the little pup, Shin extended the backside of his hand close to the little pup. As a puppy, wolves would generalize things by the way it smelled and the way it felt. Creeping up slowly, the pup sniffed and nudged Shin's hand all over, figuring out if Shin was friend, foe, or food. In the end, it decided Shin was a toy and started biting his hand playfully, Shin playing right back, playfully shaking his hand in its mouth, unbothered by its tiny teeth that would occasionally scratch him. This is it. This is what I want as my familiar, Shin said to the other 4 people. All right, if that's what you want, Rias said, pouting. She wanted him to get the 9-headed hydra or the ice wyvern. In her mind, both of them had to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There was only one 9-headed hydra in the familiar forest, and the ice wyvern is from the dragon clan, an almost extinct clan, both of which would have made amazing and strong familiars. Although they wouldn't be able to do things like hand out contracts, that wouldn't go over well. After playing with the pup for a while, Shin grabbed it by the back of its neck and picked it up. The pup wiggled around for a bit, not used to the sensation of being picked up, but stopped and resigned to it after a bit. Yep, it's a girl, Shin said, causing everyone to sweat drop. We should probably go now. To my knowledge, places like snowy areas are usually the ones with the really dangerous creatures. Hell, we've seen several huge polar bears already, Shin said, bringing the wolf pup to his chest and holding it like a lap dog. What are you going to name your familiar, Shin? Akino asked, her nipples hard enough to cut diamonds at this point due to how long they've been in this Arctic area. That went for Rias and Kaneko as well. Looking at the puppy, Shin shrugged his shoulder. With its white coat, ice blue eyes, and white nails, everything about it screamed winter. I don't know, something wintry like Yuki, Shin said, naming your white wolf Snow. Isn't that a bit lazy? Rias said, criticizing Shin. Well, what did you expect? A name like Dumbledore. It's not like she is going to care what I call her, Shin said, annoyed. He was never good at naming things. Fine, whatever. Let's get back to Zatoji so he can make Yuki your familiar, Rias said, Akino taking that as her sign. She started forming the teleportation circle needed to go back to the plains of the familiar forest. When they arrived, Zatoji was in the exact same place as he was before, still ranting about familiars and how he needed to get DxD, which Shin assumed was a ripped-off version of Ashes. Gotta catch 'em all. Yay, we understand. Can you just do the familiar binding thing now? Shin said, annoyed after listening to Zatoji rant for just a few seconds. This seemed to stop Zatoji's rant as he looked down at Shin, his eyes suddenly bugging out of his head. That's a dire wolf, Zatoji said, surprised. How did you get that? They only come from the Arctic area, Zatoji said. I know. I was there, Shin said dumbly. You went to the Arctic area. Are you crazy? Do you not know how many dangerous creatures there are there? Snow owls, which sounds cute but trust me, they're very dangerous. Ice griffins, cool but also very dangerous. Dire bears and polar bears. Ice wyverns, Arctic kitsune, yetis, all of those are high class in strength. Not to mention the snow bunnies, Zatoji said. The snow bunnies, how are they dangerous? We saw like a dozen of them and they looked pretty harmless, Rias said. Harmless, they may look cute, but when they feel frightened, they transform into these 20 meters tall gorilla creatures with 6 arms. They are one of the most dangerous creatures in the entire familiar forest. They are all ultimate class in strength, Zatoji said. Shin had found it weird that the wolf hadn't just gone after the bunnies while stalking them considering they were easy prey, but now he knew why. The wolf must have known that it wasn't a good idea to attack the bunnies. What about this? Shin said, holding up Yuki for Zatoji to see. That right there is a dire wolf. They generally take 2 or 3 years to reach sexual maturity and usually end up low class to mid class in strength. It's for this reason that they are so rare. You very rarely see one because of how weak they are in comparison to the rest of the creatures in the Arctic zone. It's also for that reason that there isn't a single wolf pack in the entire Arctic zone, Zatoji explained. Shin was surprised by Zatoji's explanation, but it did make a lot of sense. Since wolves are predators, they have to kill for food, and since there is basically nothing they are strong enough to kill, the only food they can get is scraps of other animals. He didn't really care all that much, however. He wasn't looking for a strong familiar, but a companion. What better companion could he get than a wolf, the ancestor of man's best friend? Zatoji, after getting over his surprise, did his job as the familiar master and bound Yuki to Shin as his familiar. By what Zatoji explained, it worked by binding the familiar to the evil piece inside of you, thus sharing the powers of the evil piece. So, just like Shin, Yuki would be able to use demonic magic. This also gave Yuki the ability to understand all spoken languages. However, it didn't give her the ability to understand the meanings of the words spoken. So, it didn't really do anything in that way. Nor did it give her the ability to talk. So, he would have to train her just like you would a normal dog. Afterward, they returned to the orc. Kaneko, Kiba, and Akino left immediately, saying they needed to go take a shower to heat themselves up. Rias, thanks for bringing me to the familiar forest, Shin said, placing Yuki down and letting her explore the orc, although he didn't let her wander off too far. It was no problem. Well, actually, that's a lie. I think my nipples got so hard they ripped a hole in my bra, Rias said, rubbing her hands together since she was still cold. Shin meanwhile smirked and looked at her breast. Yay, I can tell, Shin said, laughing. Rias soon joined in on laughing with him. After they settled down, Rias looked at the floor. Shin, look, I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm not going to try and come up with an excuse either. I just want you to know that when you become a high-class devil, if you want to cut ties with me for what I did, I understand and wouldn't blame you for doing so, Rias said, surprising Shin. Shin had expected her to apologize eventually, just not this soon. However, he wasn't going to complain. I would say it's all right, but it's honestly not. I don't blame you for telling your brother, nor do I expect you to put me above your family. What I don't like is that you took advantage of the situation and tried to profit off my death, twice now. However, I do appreciate you apologizing. It's a step towards gaining my trust, although a tiny one, it's still a step, Shin said. Rias nodded, grateful and happy. Shin meanwhile couldn't believe she still hadn't figured out that Shin was the one that put her in this situation entirely. Not once had she questioned him or even showed that she knew everything he had done was a fake situation he had set up for his own advantage. The phrase, not the sharpest tool in the shack, fits her perfectly. Well, I'm going to get going now. I have to get home and explain to my parents as well as Issei and Asia that a wolf will now be living with us. There will be a lot of devil magic involved, Shin said as walked over to Yuki, who was, unbeknownst to Rias, trying to drag the rug the couches and the coffee table was sitting on across the floor. After picking Yuki up and allowing her to chew on his finger instead, he started walking out of the orc. By the way, Rias, I'll be here early tomorrow morning. There are some things I want to talk to you about when it comes to your engagement, Shin said, implementing the next stage of his plan. All right, I'll be here, Rias said as she walked to her desk, putting on her reading glasses, most likely about to do some paperwork. Okay then, see you tomorrow morning, Shin said, walking out of the orc. He wished he could just go straight home, but first, he would have to go to the nearest pet store and buy a whole lot of things. He just hoped he would have enough money on him. If not, however, devil magic works just as well as money. Not to mention how irritating it was when he looked over his shoulder to a tree, seeing a phoenix sitting there looking through the orc's window. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.